used to occasionally deliver for DoorDash on the weekends. This happened about a year ago, and at the time DoorDash was new to my area. Not many people used it, but if you worked at the right times, you could still make well above minimum wage. It was a Friday night, and I got a request in the app to deliver to a house around 8 miles away. The house was on a deeply wooded back road, with absolutely no streetlights. Like, literally, if you turned your headlights off at this time of the night, you were completely blind. I delivered to a house in this area once before, but that was when it was light out, which, trust me, is a way different scene. I didn't have much for phone service, so it was difficult to find exactly where I needed to be. But after a while, I finally found the place. The house seemed pretty similar to a lot of the other houses in the area, secluded looking, and right on the edge of being able to comfortably call it abandoned. I pulled up to the house, and because of the limited visibility, I decided to keep my car's headlights on while I dropped off the food at the door. But to do this, I had to keep the keys in the ignition, and so I did. I figured it wouldn't be the end of the world if I left my car running for an extra 30 seconds. I took the bag of food to the front door. I knocked a few times, and waited about 20 seconds, when my phone went off. I was getting a call from a blocked caller ID. I decided to answer it in case it had anything to do with the food I was delivering. It was some man who sounded completely normal. He explained how he was the one who placed the DoorDash order, and he then asked me if I could just bring it to him around back. I was already sketched out as is, and so I told the guy no way. If he wanted his food, he needed to come to me up front. But to that, the line just went dead. I told myself I'd wait at the front door for one more minute, and if this guy didn't show up, I was just gonna leave. Maybe 30 seconds passed, and the guy did show up. The front door opened, and I looked at the dude. He was wearing a black ski mask, and was just standing there looking at me. I held out the food, but he made no reaction. That's when the guy yelled out, "Alright, now!" Right as he said this, 3 men, also wearing ski masks, came sprinting out from around the back of the house towards me. My flight reaction kicked in immediately, and I ran straight to my car. I opened the door, put it in drive, and had the pedal to the floor in no less than 2 seconds. The men were able to hit my car a good amount of times before I was able to drive off. With what, I don't know, but something strong enough to break my back passenger side window and make a few other dents. Not even a minute into driving off, and I got 2 back-to-back calls from a blocked caller ID that I can only assume were both from the same guy. I let both calls ring until they stopped. I was shaking uncontrollably and still struggling to regain my composure. But after a few minutes, I calmed down enough to call the police and report the incident. And that was that. I don't know what ended up happening, and I genuinely don't want to know. I've tried to distance myself from the whole situation as much as possible. It's beyond terrifying for me to imagine what those guys had planned for me that night. A part of me thinks it was just to rob me, but another part of me thinks they wanted to kidnap me, or worse. This happened back in 2019, on a Friday night in January. I had just gotten back from work, and was honestly way too tired to make my own food. I always heard good things about food delivery apps, and so I figured that night was the perfect night to finally download one and try it out. I just downloaded the first one that showed up. I then made an account, placed an order at a semi-nearby restaurant, and turned on Netflix to watch while I waited for it to arrive. Now, it's worth mentioning that on this night in particular, there was a lot of snow on the ground. The app said the delivery would take around 20 minutes, but I figured that didn't account for the terrible driving conditions. I honestly assumed it would probably take double that. I can't remember exactly how much time had passed, but it finally got to a point where I figured I'd just forget it and cancel the order. But right before I did, I got a message from the driver. Word for word, the message read, "Can't find your house. What's your personal phone number?" Now, you gotta remember, I had just downloaded the app that night, so I didn't know if it was common or not for drivers to ask for their customers' personal phone numbers. But I ended up giving it to him anyway. Around 10 minutes later, he would contact me, but not over a phone call like I expected. The guy texted me, saying he'd be at my place with the food in 10 minutes. This unsettled me a bit. I was under the impression he needed my phone number so he could call me and get better directions. But I just tried to brush it off. Around Around 10 minutes later, I would get another text saying he left the food on my doorstep. I went outside to get it and sent a text back thanking him. I figured that was that. But around midnight, I would get another text. It was the delivery driver. The text simply read, "I really liked your sweatshirt." This was now getting extremely weird, as the text suggested that the guy had stayed to watch me grab the food from my doorstep. I tried to play it cool, and responded with something like, "Haha, yeah, thanks. It's pretty nice." I can't remember everything that was said next, but it was some string of multiple texts that were something along the lines of, "So how's your night going? What are you up to?" and various other seemingly harmless messages. To these, I didn't respond. At the end of the day, I told myself I didn't know this guy, and I had no obligation to keep a conversation going. So, I just went to bed. But come morning, I would wake up to 20-something texts, and multiple missed calls all from the same number. It was again that same delivery driver. The last text was sent at 3 a.m., and as I scrolled through the texts, two in particular caught my eye. One of them read, "I'm outside your house," and the other said, "I can't see anything through your window. It's too dark." But that wasn't even the worst of it. I would later go outside to find footprints in the snow that I knew for a fact were not there the other day. Meaning, this guy wasn't joking. He had actually showed up to my house, and by the looks of the footprints had walked around it multiple times. I've since moved, and haven't received another text from the number. That was the first and only time I will ever use a food delivery app. I'm 27 and currently out of work. I recently got laid off at my job, as the company I worked for was starting to go under. So, in an effort to keep up with the bills, I started delivering for Uber Eats part-time. A couple of my friends suggested it, and so I figured I'd give it a try until I found another job. To my surprise, it was actually good money. The only thing I didn't like was some of the places the app had me delivered to. I live in a city with a lot of sketchy areas. I try to stay away from those areas while delivering, but there's only so much you can do. This night, a Saturday, I got a McDonald's order. I usually don't accept those ones, but this night was strangely dead, which was weird. Saturday nights are usually the busiest for Uber Eats. Anyway, I pick up the order and start heading towards the address I'm given. Instantly, I realized it was not in the best area, but by this point, I decided to just suck it up. I pulled up to the house, and right away the vibe was off. It was completely dark with not a single light on in the house. Usually there's at least a light on upstairs, or something that would signal someone being awake and waiting for their order. But the house seemed dead. Nevertheless, I put the car in park, turned off the engine, grabbed the order, and started walking towards the door. I walked onto the porch, and as I reached for the front door, I saw it. The door was slightly cracked open. I knocked, and as I did, the door opened slightly more. I yelled out that I had an Uber Eats order, and right away some man walked to the front door, like as if he had just been waiting right there. As he got closer, I got a good look at him. Now, I'm not one to judge a person by their physical appearance, but this guy was practically covered head to toe in tattoos. The guy looked extremely intimidating, definitely not someone you'd want to mess with. He had this look of frustration, or almost anger on his face. He was staring at me dead in the eyes. I lifted up the bag of food, and he grabbed it. The guy then started reaching in his pocket. I figured he was going to give me a tip. But no, before I knew it, the guy was holding a hunting knife and pointing it in my direction. My stomach dropped, realizing the situation I was now in. I was either going to get robbed for everything I had, or worst case scenario, killed. My mind was now racing. Thinking as fast as I could, I turned around towards my car, screamed at Derek to grab the gun, and put my hand in my pocket to start my car's engine from a button on the key. But there was no Derek, and I was in no way armed. But I figured if I could somehow convince this guy I gave myself a chance to get out of this. All I could do was pray that the threat along with the vehicle starting would be enough to convince this guy I didn't come here alone. And luckily it was. The guy shoved me back and slammed the front door. I ran back to my car and practically tore the door off trying to get in. I got out of there as fast as I could. I would of course end up calling the police, but I never heard anything back about whatever ended up happening. I assumed they didn't find anything, and that the guy was long gone by the time they arrived on scene. but I can't confirm this. If there's one thing I'm sure of, it's how fortunate I am to own a car with a remote proximity key, as I don't think the guy would have bought the whole act if I didn't start the engine. I still drive for Uber Eats every once in a while, but I've since started carrying a knife on me at all times.
The pandemic has been pretty hard on all of us, and we've all felt its effects in a variety of ways, but musicians have felt it more than most. I don't mean to throw myself a pity party or anything. I know there are older folks who are actually fearing for their lives, so I've counted my blessings plenty of times. But for most of my friends, the pandemic just meant working from home or taking a long paid vacation. For me, it meant work dried up entirely. As a professional musician, I've been playing music both solo and with bands for most of my adult life now. It's fun, but it can be really tough on occasion, and this pandemic has been the toughest time I'd ever experienced. I had to do something, anything to pay the bills, so when the drummer in my band said that he was making some pretty decent money for working for Postmates, it immediately sparked my interest. I think the real selling point was how it had benefited his health. Us musicians tend to be much more familiar with a bottle and a glass than an elliptical machine, so riding a bike and getting paid to do it seemed like a great way to get back into a fitness regimen. So, dust off my young brother's old mountain bike, oil up the gears, get myself a Postmates driver's account, and I'm pretty much ready to go. I mean, it's kind of messed up that there were no background checks or anything. Like, I literally could have been anyone, but hey, I wasn't complaining at the time. I needed the money, I needed it bad, and there were much worse things than delivering acai bowls that I could be doing. But being a delivery driver brought a whole host of new occupational hazards, and there was one particular incident in the summer of last year that I've thought about almost every single day since it happened. So, I get this one job delivering Thai food over to a place in Brentwood, just this little single-story house that barely stood out from the rest. Postmates has us doing the whole contactless delivery thing by that point, but I always used to hang around just to make sure whoever it was got their food. Sometimes you had some pretty elderly people ordering from us, since some didn't have any other means of getting food without exposing themselves. It meant a lot to me to know that I was helping like that, even if it was in such a small way. Anyway, the dude comes out to get his food, and he's not nearly as old or infirm as I first expected, but he does look tired. And not just like my neighbor's dog was barking last night kind of tired. He looked like he was over his own life, just a deep exhaustion set into his eyes. He thanked me through his mask and told me Postmates had been a godsend since his wife left. I could relate hard to that. My long-term girlfriend had left at the start of the pandemic too. She just couldn't handle the stress. Couldn't be so far away from her parents during such a difficult time, so I knew what he was talking about. Like I said, he seemed sick and tired, but he didn't hint at actually being depressed or mad or anything like that. He just seemed to be doing that macho guy thing of internalizing all of his feelings, and again, hard relate. Like I said, I often stuck around to make sure people got their food, and I'd also make a point of thanking people if they tipped big, and boy, did tired guy tip big. Right as I'm about to ride off on my bike, I make a point of telling the guy how grateful I am that he was so generous with his tip. It's literally people like him that mean I don't have to pawn my guitars to pay the rent. He just kind of nods, then says, "Just don't make the same mistakes I did, kid." I wasn't a kid. I was 28, but the weight of experience in the guy's voice, I just took it on the chin. The very next day, I get another delivery up that way, so I decide to cycle past the guy's house. I'm not 100% sure why, I guess I'm a creature of habit or something. But as I roll up, I can already see that something is horribly wrong. There's a cop car sitting in the guy's driveway, and his gate is blocked off with blue and white police tape. There's one cop sat in the driver's seat of the cruiser, and he gets out to ask me why I'm gawping at a crime scene. I ask him what happened, and he tells me to move along before turning his back on me. But then on the fly I say "But officer, that's my uncle's place." And I drop the same name he'd used for his Postmates delivery. As soon as I say that, The cop stops dead in his tracks and turns around and sighs. That's when I know it wasn't just some home invasion or a car theft or something. That's when I knew it was darker than I could have imagined. The cop says something like, "Look, I'm sorry, but you're better hearing this from the next of kin. Besides, homicide doesn't have a full picture of what happened yet." "Is he okay? Is my uncle okay?" I ask. He was taken to the hospital, but after that, I'm not sure. I'm so sorry, sir. I had to do my own research to find out what exactly actually happened, and to me, it was way worse than a home invasion or something. The older guy, the one who'd been so generous with his money and his advice, had a full-on mental breakdown the very same day that I brought him his food. From what I could gather, he'd been ranting and raving in his driveway, and then when the cops showed up, he waved a gun in their faces, and that's all she wrote. They shot him dead right there in his driveway. I don't know if he was trying to end his own life by cop or he actually had some kind of mental breakdown, but if it all happened that same night I dropped his food off, then I basically fed this guy his last meal, the final thing that ever passed his lips. A couple of hours later, he was dead. I don't know why, but that messed with me something awful over the weeks that followed. I kept thinking that maybe if I'd stuck around, maybe if I asked him more about his problems or his life in general, maybe it had given him the strength to carry on, at least for a little while. Or maybe it was always going to happen. Maybe he'd planned it or something, and nothing I could have said would have made a difference. For the longest time, those were the kinds of thoughts that I just couldn't seem to shake. Like the guy was a ghost that just haunted me, no matter where I went, or what I did. On the night of the 27th of October, 2013, Tavisha Paris was working his final shift as a pizza delivery driver. The 25-year-old Sri Lankan migrant had moved to the UK to pursue a degree in IT, and had long been employed as a delivery driver to support himself as he studied. But since he graduated with distinction from the University of Sheffield, Tavisha had quickly found himself a well-paid job in the IT sector. The generous pay package meant that it would be much easier to apply for permanent residence in the UK, which would open the door to eventually moving his family over too. His boss was sad to see the back of such a hard-working young man go, but also happy to see Tavisha moving onward and upward in his chosen career path. All he had to do was work one more shift, just one more night, and he'd be starting off his new life as a white-collar professional. At around 10 p.m., Tavisha would have been making one of his final runs of the night as he drove out to Southie Crescent with a customer's order. As he parked his car, unfastened his seatbelt, and opened the driver's side door, Tavisha was greeted by the looming figure of 25-year-old Qasim Ahmed. Qasim wasn't the one who ordered the pizza, but still wanted something from the delivery driver, his mobile phone. Tavisha saw a flash of steel in the dim streetlights as his mugger pulled out a knife and threatened to stab him if he didn't hand over his phone. But Tavisha was brave. Too brave, perhaps. He had worked hard to be able to afford an expensive smartphone, and he wasn't about to hand it over without a fight. There wasn't a fight that night. It was a slaughter. Without so much as an ounce of provocation, Qasim Ahmed plunged the knife in Tavisha's chest, who fell back onto the pavement, gasping as he attempted to stem the bleeding. As he lay dying, Qasim's 18-year-old partner in crime, Shamraze Khan, rifled through Tavisha's pockets to relieve him of his belongings. With just one stab wound, Tavisha might have stood a chance of surviving the attack. But Qasim knew he had seen his face, and he knew the hard-working young migrant wouldn't just take the robbery lying down. The police would be called, a report would be filed, and repeated offender Qasim would no doubt be headed back to prison. And in Qasim's mind, that just wasn't going to happen. He knelt down and began plunging the knife into Tavisha's chest, over and over again, stabbing the dying delivery driver a total of 14 times until he bled to death, right there on the cold Yorkshire pavement. The local community was appalled by the brutality of the murder, but also by the horrific and painfully tragic circumstances. Just one more night on the job. If Qasim Ahmed had waited just one more day to steal a phone or a wallet, Tavisha would still be alive. It's like some cruel cosmic joke, so utterly senseless that it almost sounds made up, and many were moved by the story. Given that Tavisha worked for Domino's in the UK, the company paid for his family to fly over so they could better organize his repatriation, as well as working more closely with investigating police. Tavisha's older brother, Pramod, spoke to the media on his arrival in Britain, saying, "I'm heartbroken. My brother, Tavisha, was the center of our world. He gave us so many reasons to smile. He was kind and considerate, and we were extremely proud of his achievements. We were so happy that he was doing so well in England, and we never thought his life was in any danger. I can't believe he was taken away from us in this cruel and inhuman manner. Please, if anyone saw or heard anything that could help us to catch these murderers, we beg that you step forward to help find my brother's killers." But it wasn't long before Tavisha's killers were found. As it turned out, Qasim Ahmed had stolen the cell phones of 2 young women at knife point just an hour before he murdered Tavisha, and he'd been stupid enough to do it in downtown Sheffield, a place that's practically covered in CCTV cameras. Police tracked him down as a part of their theft investigation, only to find that Qasim was in the process of disposing of clothing that was soaked in blood of his victim. He was arrested and charged with murder, and would go on to be sent to prison for a minimum of 24 years. But 24 years seems like far too lenient a sentence for someone willing to take the life of another human being for nothing more than a mobile phone. And it seems like the only justice for a person responsible for such a cruel cosmic joke, who fabricated a scenario that would horrify all who heard it, deserves to go to prison for much, much longer than just 24 years. Two stories stand out in my mind. I should note that I work day shift. These happened in broad daylight. It wasn't some spooky old haunted house at night. This stuff creeped me out in the middle of the day. So the first event goes down when I took a delivery to a nice big house in a peaceful suburban neighborhood. This middle-aged guy had to be in his late 50s or 60s, answers the door and invites me in while he goes to grab his wallet. Any other time, I'd have opted to stay outside on the porch, but the house was seriously impressive looking from the outside that I wanted to check out what kind of interiors it had going on. So I follow him to his back porch, but stop dead in my tracks when I notice the large TV screen that's playing some kind of hardcore adult movie. When he noticed I had stopped, and that it was making me uncomfortable, he didn't bother to apologize or turn it off. In fact, he seemed to like the idea that he was basically forcing me to watch something so sleazy, and beckoned me to come out onto the porch to join him. Naturally, I declined, got the money, and left. The other thing happened at an extended stay hotel that had a real bad rep, mostly from fellow delivery drivers who ended up getting robbed or jumped. So I follow the delivery instructions and head around to a side door where I find I actually needed a code to get in. Luckily, a guy sticks his head out of the window and says the pizza's for him, adding that he'll be right down to pick it up. As I'm waiting for the guy to let me in, someone else comes along and lets me in, so I ended up meeting the guy on the stairs. Now, rather than exchanging money and leaving as you might expect, the guy tells me he doesn't have the money. Some other guy back in the room has it and asked me to come upstairs with him. With the first red flag tingling in the back of my head, I step into the elevator with him. The doors close, and he says something to the effect of, "Hey, check this out," and begins to lift his shirt. Second and third red flags here. Under his shirt, he's been wrapped with bandages around his stomach. I'll save you the graphic details, but it was obviously a bad wound, a stab wound if I had to guess. He proceeds to confirm that he was in fact stabbed the other night, and that it was on the news and that I might have seen it. and after a pause in the conversation, that it hurts a lot. With the most awkward silence ever, we step off the elevator, go to his room, and he pops inside before coming back to invite me inside. Now, two thoughts go through my mind. Either this is the dumbest setup for a robbery I'd ever seen, or the couch guy is really, really lazy. I eventually settle on the fact that if this were a robbery, the guy probably wouldn't have advertised this gaping stab wound, and I kinda wanted to meet the laziest man in the world. So I step in the door, careful not to let freshly mixed stab wounds get my back. Inside, there's an older white-haired man on the couch and a young tweaked-out girl. The man hands the money to the girl, and naturally, it's a $100 bill, and that's the only cash he has. So reluctantly, I make change for him out of my own money, conclude the transaction, and hastily retreat from what I can only assume was some kind of meth house. So, on the worst delivery shift I ever worked, it's snowing like crazy, and of course my hunk of junk car can't make it up the long residential street to the house at the very top of the hill. After several attempts, I had to face reality, so I got out to begin the walk about 2 or 3 blocks of the snowy road. I get to the large, normal-looking house and ring the bell. No answer, but I hear a guy yelling at someone inside. Knock, ring, no answer. Still yelling, but it's obvious he's yelling at someone on the phone. I can see that the door I'm at goes into a small mudroom with a door to the house inside. I decide to step into the mudroom and knock on the inner door. I know, not a good idea. This guy finally opens the door and is like, "What do you want?" I'm wearing a uniform and holding a pizza delivery. What do you think I want, man? Now, the guy was a middle-aged guy with a mustache, and he has blood coming from a cut on his elbow, a cut on his lip, and blood coming from his nose, and his knuckles are torn up. Great. Dude just got into a fight, and lost by the looks of things. I see inside, and a half-empty bottle of Jack is chilling on the coffee table. "I didn't order a pizza. It's probably Frank's," he says. Then the guy just turns and goes back into the living room and sits down to take another swig of Jack. Is Frank here?" I ask. "Yeah, he's upstairs." The guy points to a staircase just inside the door on the left. Okay, I think to myself. I guess I'll go give the pizza to Frank since Drunk Fighter isn't going to do anything besides get more drunk. I took 2, maybe 3, it's been years since this happened, steps up the stairs and thought, screw this. I immediately backpedal, go to the front door in the mudroom, and leave the house and walk back to my car. I didn't call Frank because at that point I was just so livid about getting stuck in the snow, walking uphill through the snow, waiting a while for this drunk idiot to answer the door and getting sketched out. I figured if Frank wanted his pizza, he would call back or come pick it up. Frank never called to ask where his pizza was, and that made me more sketched out about the whole situation. Back when I was in community college, I worked at this pizza place that was basically in the middle of nowhere. It was located in a strip mall at the side of a highway in a pretty rural area, and there were just people dotted around the surrounded area that the store never quite went out of business. But since we hardly made any money, we operated a skeleton crew at all hours, and especially late at night. Sometimes it would just be 2 people in the store, me and one other guy. One would make the pies, and the other would drive them out to the customers. It wasn't always a perfect system, but we managed. Without a doubt, the best time to work was Wednesday because of how quiet it was. You worked a Wednesday or Thursday late shift and basically got paid to sit around on your butt and talk trash with your coworker. You'd maybe get 1 or 2 calls, nothing stressful, and that was that. But this one night, we get a call almost bang on 11 p.m., a half hour before closing. Any other time, we might actually be kinda angry, but it was just way too out of the ordinary for us to even be mad, Like I think it was legit the first time we'd ever gotten a call that late. Now at the time, my coworker is out in his car having a quick smoke before we start our clean down, so I'm all on my own when I hear the phone. Part of me was like, just don't answer it, dude. But honestly, curiosity got the best of me. Most of the families in the county work their farms, so they go to bed pretty early in the evening, so who was calling so late? When I pick up, I don't recognize the voice on the end. Given the nature of the job, I pretty much know everyone who calls, along with exactly what they're going to order. But still, it's not entirely unusual that we get someone new calling. But what was really unusual was how this guy's order differed from most others, not to mention how he was acting in general. So right off the bat, I can tell there's something not quite right with the guy. His voice was super raspy, like he lived in a whiskey still and smoked Marlboros for breakfast. And I know it's about to be a weird call when the first thing he asks for is a hamburger. I'm like, "Sir, this is a pizza place. I can read you our menu if you like." Which was no problem. We only had like 6 different pizzas with a couple of sides. The guy says it's fine. All he wants is hamburger meat. I'm assuming he meant on a pizza since we did actually do a cheeseburger pizza at the time, so I asked some clarification. But no, this guy doesn't want a pizza. He just wants hamburger meat. Raw hamburger meat. I don't even know if I'm allowed to sell raw hamburger meat. Like, I know you can eat raw hamburger meat. Like, I'm pretty sure that's what steak tartare is, but I figured there had to be some kind of food hygiene law against it. I asked my coworker, who was way too blazed to give me a solid answer, so I give the guy an honest answer and tell him I'm not even sure I'm allowed to sell him raw hamburger. The guy started begging and pleading so hard that I was actually speechless for a moment. He sounded like he was fiending for it, so bad that it was actually kind of creepy. I'm even less sure about the whole thing by that point, but after the guy on the phone offers a handsome tip, I make an executive decision and decided to go ahead with the sale. People do dumb stuff for money, right? Well, I suppose this is my thing. I throw what I consider to be $10 retail worth of hamburger meat into a plastic carton, plug this guy's address into my navigation system, then began the drive out to his house. I've been making deliveries in that area of Lawrence County for about 18 months at that time. I'm not saying I knew the place like the back of my hand, but I'd certainly never seen this guy's house before. I didn't even know that old place was there. It was some old farmhouse at the end of a long dirt road, and it looked like it was falling apart. It would have made a great haunted house, and all I could think as my headlights suddenly lit the whole place up was that it was like the start of a horror movie or something. I was the poor, dumb pizza boy, doomed to die in the film's intro that introduced whatever crazed killer or monstrous creature that was the movie's main feature. I park up, walk up the old rickety porch, and since there was no sign of a doorbell, I just knock on this guy's door. When he answers, he actually looks pretty normal. Like he'd expect some decrepit old witch to answer the door to a house like that. Not a guy in a sweater vest who looked like the dad of all dads. As I'm handing over the bag of hamburger meat, I can't resist asking him why he'd ordered raw hamburger and not an actual menu item. I figured he's going to grill it at home or whatever, so I frame my question as such. But the guy just smiles, shakes his head, and tells me he's going to eat it raw. I must have completely failed to hide the look of disgusted confusion on my face, because the guy then launches into this big speech about the benefits of eating raw meat. I mean, he talked a lot of science terms that I didn't understand, but he seemed to know what he was talking about, and it actually weirdly put me at ease for a second as he fished around his wallet for a tip. He hands me $11 in crumpled ones, and as I count them, I'm like, "Thanks, man. That's really generous." But then I look up, just in time to see the guy crack the lid on the plastic container of meat, bring it up to his nose, and take a long, deep sniff of what was inside. The way he acted wasn't like this wholesome, smells yummy kind of happy. It seemed straight up perverse. I'm just watching, trying not to freak out, as the smell of the meat seems to legit turn him on. After he huffs it, he shudders, eyes rolling in their sockets before he gets this glazed look in them, and all I'm thinking is, this is my cue to leave. I awkwardly thank the guy, just happy to get off of his property, only right as I go to turn around and walk back off the porch, I see something moving in the dimly lit hallway over the dude's shoulder. Poking out at about waist height from behind a doorframe was this big pair of terrified eyes looking back at me from sunken sockets. It was a kid. I don't even know what compelled me to ask, but whatever it was so strong that it overrode any desire I had to flee while I still had the legs to carry me. I remember saying something like, "That your kid, huh?" Instead of giving me this big smile or waxing lyrical about what a proud dad they were, something that would have suited his wholesome sweater vest dad look, he suddenly looks furious. He spins around on the spot. The kid looks terrified and disappears from view. Then, when he turns back, he just stares at me, this deep, moody stare that sent a shiver down my spine. And once again, I get that overwhelming "this is my cue to leave" feeling. I thank the guy, backing off the porch in a way where I never quite turn my back on him. He doesn't say a word in response, just keeps that angry look on his face, like I'd done something to offend him or seen something I shouldn't have. It took 20 minutes to drive back to the pizza place. 20 long minutes I had to replay the interaction in my head over and over again. I called 911 as soon as I got back, like I had no idea what was going on back there, but it couldn't have been good. No kid should be that scared of their dad, if that guy even was that kid's dad at all. My logic was that I could call 911, find out I just came out at a bad time and took the dude's actions out of context and maybe feel a little embarrassed. Or find out that something horrible was happening in that house, feel horrendous guilt that I failed to stop it, and then be haunted for the rest of my life. Though what I wasn't expecting was that there was actually a third option, one that turned out to be worse than the first two. So, I call the cops. They go to check it out. Then the deputy gets back in touch to reassure me that he'd been over to the guy's house, had a good look around, and then found that there was nothing wrong. I figured that once a cop had told me that, I'd feel fine. Kind of stupid for assuming stuff, but generally fine. But I didn't. I found myself just not believing the guy. Like he couldn't have seen the same stuff that I had and just walked away being like, "Yeah, it's all good in that house." I didn't do another delivery to that house for the rest of the time I worked there, and I certainly wasn't complaining about not having to make any more weird deliveries. But even today, I find myself wondering what the deal was with that guy and his kid, and whether or not I should have done more to investigate. Because the thing that haunts me the most is that there might be some kind of kid out there going through the most horrifying ordeal of their young lives, thinking like, why didn't that man help me? Why didn't that man help me?
I've always gone out shopping on Black Friday for many years now. But 2 years ago was by far the scariest experience I've ever had. It was Thanksgiving Day, and I was excited to go buy a new TV. I was planning on going to Target for a big sale they were having on electronics, and they were opening at 6 p.m. on Thanksgiving night. I was at my parents' place, and they had over quite a few of our family members from my mom's side of the family. I chatted with all of them, and then had dinner with everyone. Then I left their house to Target to go buy a giant TV. I arrived at Target about 20 minutes before they opened. I saw that there was already a decent-sized line of people waiting to get inside. It wasn't too long though, and I figured I still had a decent chance of getting the TV I wanted. I got out of my car and went to the back of the line, and as I did, I saw a few other people get in line behind me. I waited in line for the remaining minutes until I saw the doors to Target being unlocked. I watched as people started to go inside, then I walked quickly with everyone else, and once I got inside, I made a beeline for the electronics department. The store was really crowded, and it was hard to get through everyone, but I was able to make it there in a few minutes without running into anyone or anything like that. I got to the TVs to see a few people had already grabbed the size and brand that I had wanted, which was 50 inches. I walked quickly over to them, and just as I did, I saw another person grab one to reveal that there was just one more left behind it. I quickly reached out and got the last one. I was so happy to actually have it in my hands, because I had been pretty nervous I wouldn't be able to get it. I knew how quickly they would sell out. Probably 2 or 3 seconds after I had gained full control of it, someone came from my right side and grabbed the TV that I had in my arms. It started to come out of my hands until I grabbed it and pulled it back. At that point, the person shoved me a little bit and I almost gave up the TV. I turned and saw a man wearing a blue coat and a slight beard. He was looking at me, and as we made eye contact, he said that I had his TV. I said sorry to the man, but I had gotten the last one. The man started to turn and walk away, but then did a 360 turn and came back to me. He then asked me if I could please give it to him. I really didn't want to, and I said no, I'm sorry. He then told me how he would have got to the TV sooner, but somebody had gotten in his way. Then he added he thought he had got to the TV before me as well. I knew the man was behind me and I had got to it before him. He had tried to take it out of my hands after I already had it. I didn't want to cause a scene, but I wasn't going to give up the last TV to him, so I told him sorry one last time and started towards the check lanes. The man followed me all the way there, trying to reason with me. The more we walked, the angrier he became. It came to the point where I just started to ignore him. I finally got to the check lane, and he cursed at me and walked away. I checked out and walked my TV to my car in the parking lot and loaded it up. But as I was putting my TV in my car, I saw the man start to approach me once again. This time I got a bad feeling. It was a different environment out in the parking lot where there were less people around. I hurried up as fast as I could and then shut the door. The man was standing there from about 20 feet away, flipping me off. Then he got into a car that was parked nearby. I ignored him, and I actually felt kind of bad for the guy because I knew how great of a deal I was getting on the TV, but I also knew I didn't owe it to him to give him the last one. I started up my car and began to drive away. I drove back to my house to drop off the TV. My house was close to the Target, as well as my parents' house. As I turned onto my street, I noticed a car turn behind me. Then, as I was pulling into my driveway, I saw the car stop in front of my driveway. I got a terrible feeling. The car then started to honk. I looked and saw the man from Target yelling something out his window. Then he sped away in his car. I was glad he was gone, but I was a little concerned that he now knew where I lived. The man seemed to be a little crazy to get so worked up over a TV. I brought my TV in the house. Then I locked it up and went back to my parents for the rest of Thanksgiving. I stayed there until about 10 p.m., then drove back to my place. When I got there, I just felt suspicious. I was worried the guy had tried to break into my house or something when I was gone, but I figured I was just being paranoid. I looked around from my car at my place, and everything seemed fine, so I got out and headed for the front door. But as I made it to about 10 feet from my door, I noticed something. I had a couple of pillars in front of my house, and behind the side of the right pillar, I saw what appeared to be an arm. I knew who it had to be. I wanted to run away, but didn't want to make it obvious. I quickly stopped in my tracks, but said, "Forgot my phone," to myself. I was hoping this would work. Then I turned around and started walking back to my car calmly. The man seemed to buy it, and I wanted badly to run to my car, but I decided to remain calm. I didn't hear or notice the man moving at all, but when I reached about 10 feet from my car, I couldn't take it anymore. I broke into a sprint and ran the rest of the way. As I had reached my car, I heard the man now running after me. I got inside quickly and drove away as fast as I could. As I did, I felt something hit the car. It seemed like a rock. I drove back to my parents' place and told them everything. There was a decent-sized dent in the side of my car. I stayed there for the night and we called the police as well. However, I don't believe the man was ever caught, but at least I never did hear from him again. This happened on Black Friday about 5 years ago. I was a young 19-year-old woman in my second year of college. I lived pretty close to my school, so I was able to work at a nearby clothing store which was in a pretty big shopping center. I was scheduled to work on Black Friday, which I had done the year before. I knew it would be a long shift and really busy, but I also knew I was getting paid extra, so it was worth it. I got to work early on the morning of Black Friday. We opened at 6 a.m. and I was there. The store I worked at was pretty big, so we had a lot of people working. I was mainly a cashier, but I would also do other tasks as well. As I was working at the cash register shortly after we opened, a man came and checked out in my line. He was middle-aged and bald, and I remember he had a missing tooth in the front. As he was standing there, I could feel him just staring at me the whole time. Then he complimented me on my outfit and seemed to give off a bit of a creepy feeling, but I was nice to him and knew it was just part of the job. After that, he left. About an hour later, I moved from cashier to working in the women's department. As I was folding some clothes, I noticed the man once again. We were pretty busy, not enough where people were lined up outside or anything, but we were much busier than any other day. So I found it strange how I saw the same man once again about an hour later. But the part that I really didn't like is how I caught him just staring at me once again. When we made eye contact, he quickly looked away. It was as if he was almost hiding behind a rack of clothes. I did my best to mind my own business, and eventually the man was gone. About 10 minutes later, the man came back. I was still folding clothes and in the same area, but this time the man actually approached me. He asked me what I was doing after work. I didn't really give him an answer. I just said, I don't know. He then asked if I would go with him. I told him no, sorry, and then he grabbed onto my arm. He said we should just leave. This really took me by surprise, and I kind of yelled a little bit. I told him to stop grabbing me. At that point, there were a few people that noticed, and the man let go of me. He then walked away really fast. After that, I told a coworker, but the man was nowhere to be seen, so I thought he would be gone for good. But later on, probably 5 hours later, I saw him again, and he was staring at me. I was sure by now that the man was stalking me or something, and I was kind of concerned he would follow me when I left. I was getting off in about an hour, and I just hoped I wouldn't see the man when I was done. And I didn't, until 10 minutes before I was off when I noticed him. I got a coworker to walk out to my car with me. The man didn't follow me, which was a huge relief, and I drove home. I got home, and thankfully the man didn't follow me. However, that night, I was awoken to a knocking at my front door. I lived with my parents at the time, but I knew it wasn't them or my younger brother because they were all asleep. I laid there confused at first, until I remembered the man who had been stalking me at the store. Then I got a really creepy feeling. I didn't want to get up or even look out the window. Thankfully, I heard the sound of my brother leaving his bedroom. He said out loud he wondered who was knocking on the door at this hour as he walked. It was 2 a.m., and I guess my brother had still been up, most likely playing video games. I heard him get closer to the door, and at that point, I left my room to go over and join him in seeing who was there. As I did, my brother said to me there was nobody there. He then opened the door and stepped out. He looked around and picked up something off the ground, and then came back inside. Once inside, I saw he was holding an envelope. He opened it up and pulled out 2 Polaroid pictures. One of them was of my bedroom window, and the other was of the store that I worked at. When I realized this, I just about had a heart attack. I explained the man to my brother, and I'm 100% sure he's the one who left the envelope. We both woke up my parents, and the police were called. I ended up filling out a report and answering several questions. I got the next few weeks off work, and to my surprise, the next day the man was found at the store once again and caught. On Black Friday of 2016, I went to Walmart to see the deals that they had. There were a number of things that I was interested in getting. Nothing too big like a TV, but a few small things and some Christmas gifts for people. I went there at about midnight, and the store was pretty busy. It was really weird to see a store that crowded at midnight. I looked around, but it was tough to get around the store with it being so crowded. At one point, I was back by the doors to the back room. They had a little window in them, and I randomly was just looking through it to the back rooms. As I did, I noticed someone walking into the back, but they were not a Walmart worker. They wore a ski mask and all black. I thought it had to be some sort of joke or something. There was a worker standing nearby, so I decided to let him know. I told him there was a guy in the back wearing a ski mask. He looked surprised and then asked me to show him where he was. I pointed in the window, and he opened the door and asked me where. We both went inside the back room. It got a lot quieter back there, as there were finally no crowds. I looked in the direction that the man went, and I explained that he was walking that way. Just as I took a few steps in that direction, I felt someone grab me from behind and cover my eyes with their hand. They seemed to be wearing gloves. Then I felt someone else grab my legs, and next thing I knew, I was being picked up by at least 2 people. They carried me a little ways, and then dropped me into what felt like one of those big garbage cans on wheels. I fell onto a bag of garbage. I looked up and saw 2 men in ski masks. They started pushing me and told me to shut up. I wondered how this was going on with no employees seeing this. I couldn't see much, but I saw that we were passing by an open door leading to outside. I don't know what got into me, but at that moment, I felt there was something I had to do. So I jumped against the side, causing the garbage can that I was in to tip over. I fell out of it and got up and began running. I felt the men right on my heels, and once I made it out the door, I took a left for the front end of the store. We were at the side where there was no people, so I ran as fast as I could, and once I made it back to the front, the men stopped chasing me. I ran straight to my car and drove all the way home. Once there, I called the police. I know I should have called them sooner, but my mind was racing, and I was just desperate to get back home where I felt safe. By the time I called, however, I was told there had been other calls about the men in ski masks at that Walmart. I don't know what those men were up to, but I'm so happy I was able to get away. This was on Black Friday 4 years ago. It was in the middle of all the crowded Black Friday shopping going on. I had gone to Best Buy to look at computers. I was intending on buying a new laptop and possibly a desktop computer as well. They were probably the most popular thing that was going on sale there that day, so I got there a couple of hours early and waited in line. There was quite a few other people waiting, so I brought a chair and some hand warmers and just watched videos and played games on my phone as I waited. I remember there was a guy standing behind me who had short blonde hair, and he was just standing there facing me but not really looking at me the entire time. At one point, I asked him how he was doing, but he didn't answer me. He didn't even look at me at all. The more time went by, it seemed awkward and just really strange as well. At last, finally, the doors to Best Buy were open and all the people rushed inside. I went to the computers and got the laptop I had been planning on getting. I ended up getting the desktop computer as well. I was there for maybe 30 minutes, and then I left and brought the things to my car. I put them in the front passenger seat and then went around and got into the car. But as soon as I sat down and started the engine, I looked in my mirror and saw the man who had been standing behind me in line. He was sitting in the back seat of my car. I freaked out and immediately jumped out of the car and ran all the way back inside to Best Buy. I got out my phone and called the police. Once I regained my composure, I went back out into the parking lot, but my car was gone. I realized I had left the keys in it. The police arrived a short time later. We figured the guy was probably planning to rob me, so I guess he got my stuff. I was just lucky to be okay. But the next day, I got a call saying my car had been found abandoned about 10 miles away, and both of my computers were still inside. This story takes place on one of the best nights for kids around America, but the worst night for me. It was Christmas Eve of 2019. For a little backstory, 3 or 4 months before this event took place, I broke up with my girlfriend. Let's call her Jennifer. The event that caused me to break up with her was she stole over $900 from me. I caught her, and all she said before she left is, "This isn't over." Fast forward 3 months to Christmas Eve. Since we live in Texas and have a house in the hill country, every year on Christmas my family usually goes there to celebrate. However, this year I couldn't make it because I had to work. I was 17 years old and had just got a job at my local supermarket, and I had to work all day of Christmas. I stayed home, but I had no problem with being alone. On Christmas Eve night, it was getting late, probably 11 o'clock or so. I decided to take a shower and go to bed as I needed to get up early the next day. As I started to shower, I heard a strange noise from the garage, sort of like a metallic banging. I thought the noise was coming from the heater because I had put the water as hot as it would go. I took my shower, and when I finished, I went to go get in bed. As I did, I heard the noise again, although this time it was on the other side of the yard. I was confused because I didn't think there was anything over there. I went to go look out the window and see. I looked out and didn't see anything but my backyard, completely empty. I completely disregarded it because my backyard is pretty flat and empty, and it has nowhere for someone to hide. Now it's hard to explain, but my window is fairly large, and it has a blind spot to the left where there's a corner. Somebody could easily hide there, but I was tired and I didn't think about that at all. As I walked off, I heard a bang again, but this time on the window of my house, and as I looked out the window, I saw the figure of a person dressed in all black standing at my window. It made me jump. However, I wasn't too scared as I'm a fairly large dude and a high school football player. This all changed when the person at the window reached for his pocket for what I assume was a gun. I ran away from the window towards my parents' room to go retrieve my dad's shotgun. I knew he kept it in a safe and had the safe key under his pillow. As I was running to retrieve it, I dialed 911. As soon as the dispatcher answered, I heard the horrific sound of glass shattering. I made it to my parents' room and shut the door quietly. I whispered into the phone what was happening to the dispatcher. She said to stay on the line as the county sheriff was en route, but it would take about 5 minutes or so. I told her I was going to retrieve the shotgun. She said that's not a bad idea, but to only use it if I had to, and to use it with caution. I quickly realized my dad took the gun with him to the hill country because they were going to a gun range. I informed the dispatcher that the gun was gone. She said to make sure to stay on the line. For a moment, everything was silent, and I thought that maybe the burglar or whoever was in my house got spooked when they realized someone was home. My heart sank into my chest when I heard not one, but 2 sets of boots walking up the stairs. I heard a heavy metal pole scraping across the floor. I locked and barricaded the door to my parents' room. Then I almost passed out when I heard one of them talk, not in any voice but Jennifer's. She said, "Merry Christmas, Tommy." Then I heard a male voice mockingly say, "We know you're in there." Then they knocked on the door of my parents' room. I almost screamed and got underneath the bed. Jennifer then said, "Don't worry if you don't open the door. We'll open it for you." I heard the pole hit the door, and the lock started jiggling. I had to put my hand over my mouth to keep from being too loud. Then, all of a sudden, I heard police sirens and Jennifer muttering curse words. They ran down the stairs to try to leave out the front door when I heard someone yell, "Freeze." I heard a bunch of yelling, and then an officer come in and announce himself and tell anybody in the house to make themselves known. I called out to him saying that I was Tommy, and I dialed 911. He told me to come out slowly with my hands visible. As I left my parents' room, I saw the 2 being escorted out in handcuffs. The rest of my night consisted of paperwork and me talking to my parents, who were making a 3-hour drive to come home and be with me. This incident was very disturbing to me, and I'm grateful that I reacted the way that I did. Had I not, I may not be here right now. Christmas, everyone's favorite time of the year. It was certainly my favorite time of the year until one night that changed everything. And that one night changed my life forever. The Christmas of 2018, I was sitting in my living room watching the snow get heavier and heavier. I was enjoying myself drinking a cup of hot cocoa until I heard a knock at my door. I thought, who could it be at this hour? It was 1:18 in the morning. I got up to open the door, and to my surprise, I saw nobody. I closed the door, thinking I was being ding-dong ditched, or it was all in my head. 5 minutes later, another knock on my door. I once again got up to open the door, and when I saw nobody, I sighed and shut it. Almost immediately after, another knock on my door, and this time, I was quick enough to swing the door open, and I could just get a glimpse of a kid. He looked to be about 5 or 6 years old, running towards a house that was adjacent to mine. Surprisingly, I never knew who lived there, and quite frankly, I never seemed to care. However, this time I wanted to know why such a little kid was roaming out in the middle of the night, so I planned to go over there the next morning. Morning finally came, and I headed towards the house where I was sure I saw the little boy run into. When I knocked on the door, nobody answered. I figured they weren't home and I would come back later. That evening, I tried going back to the house and once again knocked. There was no answer again. I thought to myself this was quite strange. I then tried the door angle, and to my surprise, the door wasn't locked. Curiosity got the better of me, and I unlawfully entered the house knowing I was breaking and entering. As soon as I entered the house, I smelled something foul in the air, the smell of rotting meat. The inside of this house looked like nobody had lived there for years. I decided to check the upstairs of this house, and once I climbed up the stairs to the top step, I saw there were 5 bedrooms adjacent to each other. I checked out the one to my right, which was nothing special, just a bed and a closet. I checked out the rest of the bedrooms and found nothing. Great, I thought to myself, this was a complete waste of my time. Just as I was about to leave though, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It startled me. I knew I was caught red-handed, but just as I could say anything, I saw it was a woman, and she put her hand over my mouth and shushed me. I slowly backed away and then sprinted back to my house. As I did, I heard the blood-curdling scream of the woman telling me to come back. I got back to my house and decided not to do anything. At 3 a.m., I woke up to sounds outside my window. I looked out and saw the same woman staring back at me with a wide smile that ran across her face. Her crazed eyes stared back at me on the other side of the glass. I fell back in shock and then dialed 911. Cops were at my location within minutes. I had told them what happened and they went to the house across the street. They searched it and found nothing. They told me there were no signs of anyone there since the horrifying murder that had took place in that very house. I was shocked. I hadn't heard of anything happening at all in that house, as it was an ongoing investigation. The cops were not able to give me the information I so desperately wanted to know. The next day, I did some research, and what I found made me sick. On December 31st, a mother and her son were brutally murdered inside that very house. December 31st, I linked everything together and stared at myself in the mirror in pure horror. The events that took place to this day have changed me forever. In the next 8 months, I quit my job and had to get therapy for the rest of the year. I would wake up at late hours of the night to see the woman's crazed smiles staring back at me, and I would scream in pure horror. It's been a year since this traumatizing experience, and I'm still recovering. This happened many years ago when I was a little boy. It was Christmas time, and my family and I lived on the first floor of a large apartment complex. I remember one day on a Saturday, my mom told me that Santa was at our apartment. We went to the event room that our apartment had, and they were doing a Meet Santa type of thing. There wasn't a whole lot of people there, but those who lived nearby and had kids would bring them to see Santa. We went there and got in line, and then my sister and I met Santa. I remember when it was my turn, he asked me what I wanted for Christmas, and I told him I wanted the new PlayStation. He asked me if I live here, and I told him yes, I lived right down the hall. He then told me he would see what he could do about getting me that PlayStation and gave me a candy cane. We then went back home. I think we made some holiday cookies or something. I don't quite remember that well, but where the story really gets interesting is later that night. I was in my bed and not really that sleepy, so I was just laying there playing on my Game Boy. I was in the middle of a level in my game when I heard a noise come from my window, which was literally right next to my bed. I looked up through the blinds, which were open so that you could see through them. I saw Santa standing right outside my window, and it really shocked me. He motioned for me to open the window, and I did. He then smiled at me and asked if I remembered him. I told him yes, and he handed me another candy cane. He told me he wanted to show me his sleigh. I knew something felt off about this situation. I didn't really think Santa was supposed to show up at my window like this, because it wasn't Christmas Eve yet, it was like a week before. But he was Santa after all, so I told him I'd like to see it. He told me to come out the window, and so I opened it wider. As I was about to climb out the window, the door to my room opened. It was my mother, and when she saw what was going on, she ran to me and grabbed me. When she did, Santa turned and ran away into the night. She asked me what was going on, and when I explained it to her, she told me that the man at my window was not really Santa, but just an imposter pretending to be him. She then called the police, but by the time they got there, the man was long gone. I was young, but when I spoke to my mom about the incident in recent years, she told me based on the information of the man dressed as Santa who was at the apartment that day, they were able to locate the man and he was caught. I'm so glad that my mom came into my room when she did.
I've worked as a mall Santa for the past few Christmases now. I'm only 33, but thanks to my complete lack of exercise routine, I definitely have the figure for it. And once I have the beard and the wig and hat combo going, there's basically no telling the difference between me and a 60-year-old dude. Mall Santa work can be tough for a few different reasons. Number one, the hours are really long and the pay can be really terrible depending on which mall you manage to get employed by. Number two, the kids can be little monsters, and their parents can be just as terrible on occasion too. But the reason I'm actually considering skipping the entire thing this year and having something of a budget Christmas is that you get some seriously disturbing things happening from time to time. I mean, the kind of things that keep you up at night, even after a long, exhausting shift. However, the worst thing that's ever happened to me as a mall Santa was actually nothing to do with kids, parents, or terrible pay and hours, and I'm sure you'll see why after I tell the story. So every year, usually when the malls are quietest during weekday mornings, we get specially organized visits from special needs kids or adults with learning disabilities who are bussed in from the surrounding areas. Pretty much every other mall Santa I've spoken to about this agrees that it can be one of the most rewarding parts of the job, and that the adults with learning difficulties are often even more excited about the prospect of meeting Santa than some of the kids are. Literally the only downside is that some of them are so heavy that my thighs hurt after having like 50 in a row sit on my lap, but other than that, it's honestly one of the best parts of the job. Last year, I'm in the middle of one of the special sessions when I get this girl coming up and sitting on my lap. I say girl, but she was legitimately a grown woman, looking like she was in her mid-30s or something, but she had the mental age of about 9 or 10, all smiles and giggles, way shy about meeting Santa again. It was cute as all get out, but the interaction was not so cute, and turned that way pretty fast. So like I said, she's all giggles and smiles as she comes up to sit on my lap, and I give her the usual spiel, asking her name, how old she is, if she's excited for Christmas and all that stuff. Then, when it comes to asking her what she wants me to bring her on Christmas Eve, she starts thinking about it. smiling at first before she suddenly gets super serious with a touch of sadness. I'm asking her if she's okay, what the problem is, and she's like shaking her head, acting like she doesn't want to tell me anything. I take the time and explaining that no matter what she asks for, I'll try my very, very best to bring it to her, no matter how big or small it is, that Santa always tries his best to bring good little girls and boys what they ask for on Christmas. She takes a moment, then the exchange goes a little something like this. You mean it, Santa? You can get me anything I want for Christmas? Anything. Anything you want. Just tell me and I'll do my best. Okay, well... And at this point she lowers her voice to a whisper and leans into my ear. I want my boyfriend to stop hitting me. Can you make that happen? I was sort of dumbstruck for a second. Like all of the things I thought she was going to ask, that would most definitely not have topped the list. I remember just nodding at first, trying to find the words, then being like, I'll make that happen for you, sure, no problem. She was so happy to hear that I'd fix it for her, and gave me the biggest hug I think I'd ever received while working as a mall Santa. I had to put on a huge smile, and of all the times I've had to fake being jolly and merry, that time with her was the hardest. But I just felt numb, like completely broken by what I'd heard, and I just tried my best to get through the rest of the session without bursting into tears. I remember all these thoughts rushing through my head, terrifying ideas of institutional abuse. She said boyfriend, and that made it extra creepy. Like, sure, it could have been just another guy in her care group or something, another adult with learning difficulties who she'd hooked up with somehow, but there was nothing to say that it wasn't a member of her care team that was, like, abusing her, in a completely different sense, too. Not just physically, but, well, you catch my drift. So when the session was over, I approached the member of the care team that had organized the trip and had accompanied them to the mall. I didn't let anything slip. I just told them how great I thought the session had gone and asked a few details about the group that had organized them. As it turned out, they were all from the same care home type thing, so I made a note of the name of the place as well as the name of the girl that was apparently being abused. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just kept picturing some evil monster abusing that poor girl, taking advantage of their position to put some poor special needs woman through torture, then telling her that she'd be killed if she ever breathed a word of it to anyone. And here's where stuff starts getting even more intense. Now, I could have just called 911 with the info I had at hand, registered a general complaint, and then heard nothing back about it. But a buddy of mine had a cousin with the local police department, and not just some gumshoe beat cop either. They were a detective. It took some convincing, but I convinced my buddy to pass along their cell phone numbers so I could get in touch with the dude personally. It took a little while, but I managed to get through to the guy. He sounded pretty skeptical at first and seemed kind of irritated that his cousin had even given me his number, but once I explained what the issue was, his tone changed completely. Now, I didn't find this out until way later from my friend, but his cousin had a special needs daughter who was probably going to have to either live with them for the rest of their life or was going to head into a group home at some point so she could have some measure of independence. So when I explained the situation with the special needs girl I met as a mall Santa, it obviously hit the guy right in the feels as the topic was so close to home. The detective tells me that he'll look into it, thanks me for letting him know. I get him to promise to tell me if anything comes of it, and he says yes, and we hang up. And that was the last I heard of it for like a month. Then after maybe 5 or 6 weeks, I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Christmas was over, the mall Santa job was way behind me, and I was back to working my regular hours as a self-employed mechanic. Then I get a call from a number that seems vaguely familiar, although I wasn't quite sure why. Turns out it was my buddy's detective cousin, who reminded me of the tip that I'd given him about the care company. Of course I remembered, but by that time I really didn't think anything would come of it, but oh, how wrong I was. The detective thanks me for the information, and although he told me he couldn't say too much, he told me to keep an eye out on local media outlets. The next thing I know, it's all over the local papers that there's been a misconduct scandal involving a local care company. I picked up a copy and read the story, only to find out that it's the very same one I had reported. The long and short of it is that the cops had uncovered endemic levels of abuse in the company, stuff that varied from financial discrepancies to straight-up physical abuse, and sickeningly enough, there was even cases of care workers taking advantage of mentally disabled females in ways that were seriously inappropriate. There were numerous arrests, with some of the sleazier and violent criminals looking like they were going to get years in prison for how long they so cruelly taken advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in society. It made me sick to my stomach to read about how some people could bring themselves to do something like that, but it was stopped, and I felt incredible that I'd actually managed to be a part of the chain of events that brought the whole thing crashing down. I just hoped that that poor girl, who was obviously pretty traumatized by what was happening to her, and just not being able to understand why it was happening either, found some measure of peace after it. And in a way, Santa did kind of bring her exactly what she wanted, even if it wasn't on Christmas Day, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is a thought that never fails to make me tear up. Okay, so I have something of a confession. I get totally out of control when I have a crush, and I suppose if you were to phrase it so insensitively, then I guess you could call me a stalker. It probably took way longer than it should for me to realize it too. Like I just figured I was, I don't know, intense, passionate, whatever you want to call it. When actually, what I feel for guys is, well, as my psychiatrist put it, it's unhealthy. Whenever I have a crush on a guy, it builds and builds until it's almost completely out of control. Sure, I get the usual stuff at first. Butterflies in my tummy, that giddy euphoria people feel when their crush is around. But I get other things too. Like, there's a lot more, and some things that people might consider kinda scary too. When I like a guy, they're constantly on my mind. They're usually the first thing I think about when I wake up in the morning, and usually the last thing I think about before I sleep too. I look up every social media account they have, and guys tend to be much less careful about their privacy settings, which makes that whole thing super easy. I make sure to see every single post, every comment, every friend, every photo they're in. I check their social media accounts usually more than 4 or 5 times a day. I also Google them online, hoping to stumble across anything new. For years I told myself that I just liked knowing things about my crushes. Like, isn't that the point of loving someone? To know them as well as you know yourself? Well, again, according to my psychiatrist, not in quite the same way as I imagine. I track down where they live and spend way too long on Google Street View just admiring the place. I never go by or do anything though. I never want the crush to know how obsessed I really am. That would be absolutely mortifying. My psychiatrist says this is how I know what I'm doing is wrong and why he knew we could make progress if I put my mind to it. I also tend to get real jealous. I try not to show it, but I have to admit that seeing them having fun with anyone that isn't me, it really tears me up inside. I grow to hate their friends and family immensely, self-inserting myself into every little moment of their lives and telling myself, it better be with me, more fun, more special, more magical and memorable. How intensely I like someone tends to be based on how long I spend around them and in what context. Like the less I see them, the less I like them. The more I see them, it's like I'm exposed to something they're pumping out, like seeds taking root in my brain almost. A good example would be this. In 5th grade, I liked this guy. In 6th grade, the same guy, I became obsessed with him. Summer rolled around and I stopped. School started, I started liking him again. Repeat for 8th grade. Then he moved away for good and I stopped liking him for good. It was like I couldn't live without him for the longest time, but then, out of sight, out of mind too. I know that's not how other people function. Normal people miss someone no matter how far away they are, and no matter how long it's been since they saw them. Not me though. And I think that might be the only saving grace for some of these guys. I can't control my emotions even with the medication I'm given. It's one of the biggest challenges I face with my condition. If I didn't care so much about what I thought my crush thought of me, I would show up to his house and look in through the window, hoping to see him. I would pester all his friends to get every bit of info about him. I thank God sometimes that I've not gone too far, that I still have one foot grounded in reality even if the other is hovering over the abyss. Judging from what I've said so far, I'm guessing that most of you would assume me to be a violent person, like how a lot of those psychopaths and let's not meet stories end up being. But in fact, I'm the opposite of that. No one I know would ever think of me with such thoughts. I'm bubbly and kind towards those who are kind towards me. I never resort to physical confrontation. It's just not my personality. No one even has a clue how obsessive my thoughts get, and aside from this little confession, I tend to keep things that way. I hate how I get so attached to people, but as my psychiatrist says, at least you're self-aware. I've liked someone for 6 months currently, and I despise myself for it. I pretend not to be obsessed all the time and refrain from speaking about the person 24/7, even though I want to, because I don't want friends and, most importantly, my crush knowing about my condition. Like, I'm terrified I will ruin my life because people would judge me for it without getting to know me. I guess that's part of why I'm writing this too. Bottom line is, I need help on how to cope with these feelings if I can. I surprisingly let go very easily. You know that kid who moved in 8th grade that I was obsessed with for like 3 years? When I found out he was moving, I was shocked and sad for about 15 minutes and then didn't really care. It was like whatever bug inside my brain just said, oh well, on to the next one, I guess. So, my issue is just how to handle my feelings when I like someone. Keep in mind, this is just a light description of my issue. I felt a lot more than what I described here so far. I hope I get over my current crush over the summer and don't have any classes with him next year, since I would probably fall for him again. I rarely get crushes, but when I do, they better watch out. I've only had 4 crushes in total in my life so far, and 3 were part of my obsessions. Anyway, that's about it. I hope I could provide some insight into how female stalker types work, because all that yandere stuff is just a bunch of bull. That's like a guy's projection, the ignorance of thinking that guys and girls think or act similar, when honestly, the reality is much more insidious, and arguably, much more terrifying. Back when I was still a senior in high school, me and my mom went on a trip to the movies. It was this regular mother-daughter bonding ritual we used to have. Catch a movie, critique it, and then hit up the Bob Evans next door for dinner. We'd always pick up my dad something in a takeout box too, and I really miss those days. But anyway, we have our food and drive home, just like we always did, and the rest of the night was uneventful. But the next morning, I wake up to a Facebook friend request from a name I didn't recognize. Thinking it might have been a mutual, I just accepted, but then like 5 minutes later, I get a message from the same account that says something like, "Hey, I know this might sound a little weird, but I saw you at the Bob Evans last night and I wondered if you might like to go out sometime." So I'm like, how did someone figure out my name? Did they overhear my mom say it or something? Like, I get he was polite, but it still creeped me out. Why would you go to those lengths to find me? And he must have been looking for hours. Immediately, there's all these red flags, so I had no intention of accepting his invitation, but at the same time, I didn't want to be a jerk to him. So I messaged him back like, "Hi, yeah, I was there, but I'm actually kind of seeing someone right now, and I don't think they'd be too happy if we went out." At first, their reply was encouraging, and they seemed to take it on the chin. They say like, that sucks. Sorry if this is awkward now." I respond, "No, don't worry. You didn't know. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, though." It was a close-ended reply, you know, the kind that's designed to just end the conversation. Next thing, he starts typing, and I figured he's going to just carry on being gentlemanly, creepily direct, but gentlemanly, I suppose. But no. There's this very subtle shift in his tone when he says, "I just figured, since I went to all this effort to find you, you might give me a chance." This is where I saw a kind of, opportunity. I had literally zero clue how this guy had found me, and I didn't like the idea that just anyone could look me up online no matter how innocent their intentions were. So I straight up asked him, "How did you find me?" He starts typing, then stopping, typing, then stopping, and I can tell he's thinking of the right way to phrase it. Then he says something like, "Where there's a will, there's a way. I can find anyone online. It's easy. When I set my mind to something, I achieve it. Is your current boyfriend an overachiever like that?" I distinctly remember him using that term, overachiever. It was honestly so cringe. If I wasn't put off before, I certainly was then. But still, I wanted to find out how this creep had managed to track me down. So I might have done something stupid to get him to talk and said, "Honestly, no, and it's kind of hot that you're so smart and stuff. So, how did you do it?" He responds, "I was the one who swiped your mom's card," he replied. So, a liar too. He wasn't some hacker. He just worked at the Bob Evans. So yeah, he probably had overheard my name, then just matched it up with the name on my mom's card. Then bingo, he finds me on Facebook. I had to hold back from just letting loose on this guy. But if he was that much of a psycho, then I figured it was better to not make him mad. "Ah, sneaky. I like it," I replied. "But like I said, kinda seeing someone right now, so thanks, but no thanks. Bye." I mute the conversation, but don't block the guy or unfriend him or anything. See, making him mad I was worried about. Then I just go about the rest of my day. Yeah, I told all my friends how creepy I was, and I casually suggested to my mom we pick a new food venue for our post-movie dinners. But other than that, I just went about my day as usual. It's kind of weird how this pattern repeated itself. The first time I'm asleep, blissfully ignorant that some creep is plugging my name into Facebook, probably to perv at my display picture. The second time I had him on mute, so I had no idea what was going on in that little message thread. It wasn't until later on that night that I opened my messenger on my phone and actually saw the little 44 notification count next to his name that I realized he'd sent me other messages. And yes, it did say 44. He'd sent 44 different messages, mostly rants, and he'd been sending them on and off all day. But it wasn't until I actually read what they said that I started to freak out. I'm not going to type up everything I remember him saying, and I'm pretty sure a lot of you will be able to guess the majority of it. Think nice guy style put-downs coupled with threats of actual violence. He basically said that if he'd managed to track me down online in a few hours, imagine what he could learn by the end of the week. He said he had friends that would help him break into our house. After that, they'd tie my parents up, kill them in front of me, then take turns abusing me until I was used up and lifeless. And that's the clean version of it, condensed into 2 sentences. 44 different lengthy messages he sent me. Think about that. The final message I read, it went on, before I ran downstairs to tell my mom and dad, was the message that read, "I'm in my car, and I'm looking for your house." I didn't know he was just trying to scare me, so I was crying as Dad called the cops. The guy ended up getting arrested for the threats he made, and I know he got fired from the Bob Evans because my mom kicked up a stink about it after the arrest. I never saw the guy again, so I'm thinking it was a case of his bark being louder than his bite. But I know that there are other women out there who aren't so lucky, and their stalkers are much more willing to get up close and personal. I just hope we can one day live in a world where men don't act all predatory and creepy with women they like. Like, it's so counterintuitive to what we want in a man. I wish they just understand that. But till then, I suppose all we can do is be safer online and with dating apps, and hope we never run into that one sick psychopath that won't take no for an answer. Rebecca Lucille Schaefer was born in Eugene, Oregon on November 6th of 1967. Her father, Dr. Benson Schaefer, was a child psychologist, while her mother was a writer and instructor at the Portland Community College. Given how proud she was of her Jewish roots, a young Rebecca would dream of becoming a rabbi. But after a chance encounter with a modeling agent, she began modeling clothes during her junior year in high school. Rebecca would become a popular subject of many photographers, and she made appearances in department store catalogs and television commercials, as well as an extra in a straight-to-TV movie. She was so successful that in August of 1984, her parents gave her permission to move to New York City to pursue a full-time modeling career. At 5'7", she was considered too short for high-fashion modeling jobs and struggled to find work as a result. Rebecca even moved to Japan for a short stint in the hopes of finding work there, but found Japanese modeling standards were even stricter than back in the United States. Yet within just a few months of moving back to New York, Rebecca landed her first TV role, playing Annie Barnes on ABC's One Life to Live. The following year, she appeared on the cover of 17 magazine, which caught the attention of television producers who were casting for a sitcom called My Sister Sam. Through a series of grueling auditions, Rebecca won the role of Patricia Russell, and the series was initially a hit, but it was canceled halfway through its second season in 1988 due to falling ratings. Yet the role established Rebecca's acting career and earned her several other roles in a variety of different productions. However, the role also brought her to the attention of an extremely dangerous and unstable young man, one that would have an indelible and catastrophic impact on her life: Robert John Bardo. The youngest of 7 children, Bardo was the son of a non-commissioned officer in the United States Air Force who had met his mother whilst deployed in Japan. Due to the nature of his father's occupation, the Bardo family moved frequently, eventually settling in Tucson, Arizona in 1983, and to say young Robert had a rough childhood would barely broach the issue. A young Robert was placed in foster care after abuse from one of his siblings got so bad that he threatened to take his own life. Couple that with the Bardo family's history of mental illness, and it's quite clear that he never really had a shot at an emotionally stable adulthood. By the age of 15, Bardo had been institutionalized to treat severe emotional problems, and it was around then that he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Shortly after, he dropped out of Pueblo Magnet High School and began working as a janitor at a Jack-in-the-Box restaurant. By the time he was 19, he had been arrested 3 times for disorderly conduct, and Bardo's neighbors would frequently complain that he exhibited unexplainably strange and threatening behavior towards them. Yet, it seems they had no idea how deep Bardo's madness extended. You see, Bardo had a dangerously obsessive personality, and found himself increasingly obsessed with certain female celebrities. The first target of his dangerous obsession would be 13-year-old Samantha Smith, an American schoolgirl, peace activist, and child actress from Manchester, Maine, who became famous during the Cold War. After her death on August 25th of 1985 in the Bar Harbor Airlines Flight 1808 plane crash, Bardo was devastated, but it was during a period of intense mourning that he discovered Rebecca Schaefer while watching My Sister Sam. After writing Rebecca numerous letters confessing his love for her, Bardo attempted to gain access to the set of My Sister Sam, but was turned away by security. It was then that Bardo turned to a terrifyingly creative method of discovering Rebecca's whereabouts. Bardo contacted a Los Angeles-based private detective agency, promising to pay handsomely if they could obtain the address of one Rebecca Schaefer. Using the California Department of Motor Vehicles records, the private detective successfully obtained Rebecca's address, passing it along to Bardo for a tidy sum. They had absolutely no idea how unhinged Bardo was, or what the ramifications of their actions were. Yet they were soon to find out just how irresponsible they'd truly been. On July 18th of 1989, Bardo drove to Los Angeles to confront Rebecca at her home. He was angry because she hadn't bothered to reply to any of his letters, but not only that, he was furious because she'd appeared in a raunchy love scene in the movie Scenes from the Class Struggle in Beverly Hills. Bardo allegedly told Rebecca that she'd lost her innocence, and that in partaking in such an impure movie scene had become just another Hollywood harlot. He ended the bizarre tirade by assuring her that he was a big fan, and all he wanted was the best for her. Rebecca was terrified, and apparently told Bardo she wanted nothing to do with him, slamming the door in his face and rushing to call the police. They assured Rebecca they'd come over to her as soon as they could, but the situation wasn't obviously an emergency in the moment, and there were no lights or sirens rushing to her apartment. In the meantime, a heartbroken Bardo walked over to a nearby diner to get some breakfast. His plan to win over Rebecca had failed, but he also had a plan B, one he would use in the event of Rebecca's rejection. About an hour later, Rebecca's apartment doorbell rang again. Assuming it was the cops, she rushed to answer the door, but when she opened it, the only person she saw standing before her was Robert Bardo. Robert then raised a Ruger 357 handgun and shot Rebecca through the heart. He then tossed a copy of Catcher in the Rye into her apartment and was later arrested in Tucson while wandering aimlessly through traffic. The following year, Robert tried to argue that he was criminally insane, but a judge dismissed the idea and labeled him a dangerously obsessive but otherwise mentally competent person. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and is currently serving his sentence in California's Avenal State Prison. As a consequence of Bardo's actions and his methods of obtaining Schaefer's address, the U.S. Congress passed the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, which prohibits state departments of motor vehicles from disclosing the home addresses of state residents. Rebecca's murder also prompted the first anti-stalking state laws, including the California Penal Code 646.9, which was essentially the nation's first law against obsessive or fixated persons. It was a nice gesture, but few deny that they came too little, too late for Rebecca, who needed protecting from a dangerous, violent stalker long before there were any legal means to combat them. We can only hope these laws are direct and robust enough to stop the same thing from happening again, but given the determination of the human spirit, that seems like very wishful thinking indeed. This happened back when I used to get on Grindr, but it always reminds me of how glad I am that I'm no longer doing the online dating thing. For those unfamiliar with Grindr, it's a gay dating app that shows guys nearby. It makes you use your location while using the app, but it doesn't give your exact location unless you send it to the person directly. I got a message from a blank profile. No name, no pic, and no bio. The only thing that popped up was how close he was, less than a mile away. This happens a lot because there are a lot of closeted guys out there, especially back then. Being an overweight guy in the gay community, I had to take anything I could, because most gay guys in my community wouldn't even give me the time of day. He started off nice enough, introduced himself as Jesus, and asked how I was doing and all of that sort of small talk. He told me he was into chubbier guys, and after exchanging pics, we both agreed that we found the other one attractive. He asked me if I'd like to come over to play video games and maybe have some fun. I'd only met a couple of guys off of Grindr, and although we had some good times, it ultimately didn't pan out. However, I had met them somewhere public first, so I'd never met anyone at their place or had anyone come over to mine. I figured it had been long enough and some casual fun might be nice. Plus, he was really cute and actually my type. He agrees to come pick me up since I'm only a few blocks away. Apparently, he lived in the nearby trailer park. I decide I'd like to shower first, and he says he'll head over. Then, he says he's really embarrassed to ask, but wonders if I'd be willing to lend him $20. Supposedly he lived with his mom, and she had left for the weekend without any food money for him. I know it was really stupid in hindsight, but I felt kinda bad for him. I tell him I don't have any cash, but he says that's okay, I can just send him some money through an app. I don't remember what it's called, but it was something like Venmo. I go ahead and send it, take my shower, and then let him know I'm ready. He says he's heading out, but can't find his keys. I say it's okay, I'll just wait outside for him. I hadn't given him my address yet, but I was almost ready to. However, when I asked if he had found them, he had never responded. Minutes went by, then an hour. I messaged him again to ask if he was still coming, and I could see him going on and offline, so I know he read my messages. I finally just accepted he was ghosting me and probably just wanted money. I messaged him one last time and told him that it was pretty messed up, as well as explained that had he just asked, I would have given him the money without having to go through all of that. What can I say? I can be a softie sometimes. Fast forward a couple of weeks. I never heard back from him, so I just blocked him. I get another message from someone on Grindr relatively close to me. His profile is also blank, which raises my suspicions. He tells me he's also into chubby guys, which really makes me suspicious because it's highly unlikely two chubby chasers live so close to me. We trade pics again, and it's a different guy. However, he suddenly asks for money again. In Grindr, you can create as many accounts as you'd like. All you need is an email address. There were tons of spam accounts on there that were automated. It was a real pain. Anyways, I call him out because I was like 95% sure it was Jesus. At first, he acts like he doesn't know what I'm talking about, calls me crazy, and then blocks me. I felt a little bad because I thought maybe I had made a mistake and just chased off a guy for nothing. Then again, his sudden offensive reaction made me have doubts. Weeks go by, and every so often this same guy tries to fool me even though I don't fall for it. Eventually, I blow up on him and ask him what his problem is. We start going at it, and eventually he says, "You won't say that to my face." I tell him that I would gladly tell him this in person, not that I expected him to actually show up this time. He responded with, "All right, we'll see about that. Be there soon." Now, I was a little worried at this point because it crossed my mind that he may not actually be gay and might be some homophobe looking to bash some gay guys. My mind always goes back to those men who have lost their lives after meeting up with someone on Grindr. However, I realize I never gave him my address. Now, this is the conversation we had. I say, "Nice try, but I never gave you my address." "Yes, you did, stupid. You just didn't know it was me. Be ready. I'm on the way." At this point, my anxiety starts setting off because I did give my address to a guy who had to cancel last minute, but I didn't think anything of it because it was before Jesus had messaged me a second time. I tried to think about what to do, so I decided to try and document his threats. I respond, "I know I didn't give you my address. Besides, what do you want with me anyway?" "You'll see. I've got something for you." Now, the trailer park is always having police go by there, and my neighborhood is separated from theirs by a bayou. At night, I always heard gunshots out there, so I began to panic. What if he had a gun? What if he brought friends with him? I say, "Oh yeah? And what's that?" "Something that'll shut you up. I'm outside." I started freaking out because I couldn't tell if he was just trying to mess with me or if he really was outside. I had been screenshotting everything and sent it to the Grindr admins to report him for credible threats of violence. I wasn't sure if I should call the cops or not because if he was lying, I didn't want to look stupid. Plus, I wasn't sure if it was even enough for them to do anything. I decided to peek outside from the upstairs window and see if I could spot him. If I could get the make and model of his car, maybe I could at least have something to give the police. I live in the middle of a cul-de-sac, so when I look out the window, I can see all the way to the end of the street. When I looked out, I saw a car I'd never seen before parked on the side of the road at the end. My heart was pounding me because I just knew it was him, but a part of me was hoping it wasn't. I decided I'd test him and see if he really was out there. He says, "I'm waiting." "I'm outside already, where are you?" Of course I wasn't, but if that was him, and he did know my address, then why wouldn't he just park outside my house? Sure enough, I was right. I see you. You're gonna get it now. Then give it to me, I'm right here. Just you wait." I knew he couldn't see me from his car because I was peeking out discreetly and our windows have a privacy shade on them where people only see a black screen from the outside. A few more minutes go by and the car takes off. I have a feeling that he used Grindr to triangulate the area of where my neighborhood was, but of course he couldn't find my exact house because it hadn't been him who I'd given my address to. Grindr later sent me a message saying that he'd been banned from the app and they'd contacted the local authorities. I never heard anything else after that, so I don't know what became of it. The cops never contacted me if they did pay him a visit, and I never heard from him again. Now I'm married, so I don't use Grindr anymore, thankfully. Still, it took a while before I was able to sleep soundly after that. I rarely left the house, and when I did, I always made sure his car wasn't around, anywhere. I'm from a city in the northwest of my country called Garanuns. It is a very beautiful place. Some call it the City of Flowers. I love Garanuns, but I cannot live there anymore. There are too many bad memories for me, and people accuse me of something which I am innocent of. You see, 8 years ago I lived next to a family called the Negromontes. They seemed like very nice people, but they did not have a lot of money since the man of the house, Jorge, could not find a job for some reason. It was spoken in our neighborhood that Jorge could not work because of an illness he had, but he had helped support his family by making and selling pastries to his neighbors, including myself. Jorge made the best empadas and salgados, which are traditional Brazilian pastries that we all love to eat, and on more than one occasion, I found him knocking at my door with a tray of delicious empadas for sale. They were very affordable and very delicious, and I know I am not the only one in our neighborhood who used to buy them very regularly from him. It felt good to be able to help him support his family like that. Some people said Jorge was mentally ill, but it seemed obviously to be that he had some kind of physical condition too. Sometimes, when Jorge called over at my apartment, he would burst out laughing for no reason at all, like he had heard someone tell a funny joke that only he could hear. Sometimes his arms seemed to shake when he had out the tray of empadas for me to look at, and one day he started having a nosebleed which dripped all over the pastries. He apologized a lot and seemed very nervous as he walked away from my door, but when I assured him it was okay and that I hoped that he would feel better soon, he broke into this high-pitched laughter as he disappeared around a corner. Jorge could act very strange like that, but I just felt sorry for him and kind of admired how determined he was to support his family like that by working hard at making delicious food. But one day, I came home from my job to see a few police cars outside the Negromonte house. All of the neighborhood had come out of their homes to see what was going on, and we were shocked when a forensics team showed up too. These are the police who wear the white overalls and masks, the ones who look for pieces of dead bodies when there had been a murder. There were many rumors about what the family had been doing, but we did not have to wait long to find out what was going on. The pictures were all over the newspapers one day, and everyone heard the story being told on the local radio and TV stations. Human remains had been found in the family's backyard, and they were identified as belonging to a local homeless girl named Jessica, who had gone missing some time before. The news reports told us that the Negromontes had apparently lured her into the house with lies that they were looking for a nanny to look after their young child, but had then killed her and buried it in the backyard. We were all shocked by the news, but as time went on, even more disturbing facts were made public regarding the murders. I remember the day that the police had a press conference with journalists from all over the country. They claimed to have found a 50-page book that had been written by Jorge that he had titled Revelations of a Schizophrenic. The book was all about how he claimed to have been hearing voices talking in his head about how he should kill women, how what he did was all part of some kind of terrible satanic purification ritual, and that he had a plan to purify the world and reduce its population. I found this to be extremely disturbing and upsetting, as I would never have imagined that Jorge could ever think like this. He always seemed like such a sweet person, but I guess I was wrong to think that. But somehow, as the weeks went by, we heard things that were somehow even worse, things that destroyed my life as I knew it. Forensics teams had analyzed the entire Negromonte house and discovered traces of the murdered woman's body tissue on cooking utensils used by the family. What's more, rather large chunks of flesh had been found to be missing from the bodies most recently buried in their backyard. Police could only come to one conclusion, that the family had been butchering the murdered women before cooking and eating their flesh. But what's more, rumors began to spread that not only had the family been practicing cannibalism, but they had actually sold some of the meat to the neighboring community in their empadas and salgados. It was horrifying to learn, as, of course, I had bought Jorge's pastries from him many times before, and not only had I eaten them, I thought they were very tasty. I remember sitting on my couch watching the TV when I heard the news. The room began to spin. I felt numb for a few moments, unable to properly compute the information that I had just heard, until it all became clear to me in one single horrible moment. I had eaten human flesh without my knowledge. I ran to the toilet and was violently sick. This was all traumatizing enough for me, but then rumors began to spread that the whole community was part of some satanic cult, and that we actually knew that we were eating it. People from all over the city came to our neighborhood to harass the people living there, including myself. Despite our denials, they called us all cannibals and told us that we were no longer welcome to live in Garununs. I personally had a note posted through my door from someone anonymous telling me that I would be killed in revenge if I did not leave the city. I didn't want to risk my life, so I left for the coastal city very far away from Garununs, where I currently live alone. I don't eat meat anymore. I am purely vegetarian because the taste of meat brings back horrible memories for me and makes me instantly sick every time I taste it. So, now you understand why I don't wish to give my name or give too much information as to where I live, as I'm afraid I'll be hunted by these people seeking vengeance for Jorge Negromonte's terrible crimes. But I swear to Jesus Christ I did not know what I was eating, and if I ever did, I would not have eaten it, and I would have reported Jorge to the police. So please, although you think you might know who your neighbors are, ask yourself, do I really know who I'm living next to? Do I really know what they're doing behind closed doors? Because for some of us, we don't know exactly who our neighbors are. Not until it's far too late. I'm 20 years old, female, and this was the last time I willingly stayed in a room alone with a child. I used to babysit on the weekends when I was 15. Most of the families that I babysit for were nice, sophisticated families who had sweet children that I loved. However, the Cooper family were the exception. Mr. and Mrs. Cooper had 2 children, Michael, who was 10, and Antoinette, who was 4. Michael was quiet, though misbehaved and crazy demented. Antoinette was loud, cheerful, and the complete opposite of her brother. She was so innocent. I truly adored Antoinette, yet I despised Michael. He was an absolute terror. I'd watch over the 2 children on Friday nights for 3 hours while their parents went on a date, meaning 3 awful hours of psychological, emotional, and physical torture from Psycho Michael. There were many times that I would catch Michael staring at me while I was sitting at the dining room table doing my homework. I'd tell him to quit it, but he wouldn't stop until I moved out of view. Michael was really cruel to his sister. He would push her down the stairs, pull the heads off her Barbie dolls, and cut up her clothes. Michael would also hit the cats with a sock full of quarters. One cat actually ended up dying from internal injuries. He would growl at the neighbor's dog on a good day, and tape stuffed animals to windows with scissors sticking out of their heads on a really bad day. He was a horrible little kid to say the least, but the scariest part about babysitting the twerp was the night that he came for me. Let's keep in mind that I wasn't supposed to even be there that night, but Mr. and Mrs. Cooper called my mom and asked if I could babysit for them since their other arrangement had fallen through. My mom agreed without even asking me. I was supposed to babysit from 5 o'clock in the evening until 10 o'clock at night. It was storming out, so the television had no signal, and my cell phone didn't have any reception, and Antoinette was staying with her grandmother, leaving me alone with the psycho child for 5 whole hours. I'm glad to say that the first few hours went by pretty quickly and without incident. He was fed, bathed, and put to bed at around 8. Michael had fallen asleep the instant his head hit the pillow. I breathed a sigh of relief and lay down on the couch with headphones in, not knowing it would be a mistake. The music was loud enough to drown out any other sounds. I stared at the ceiling for a while because there was no use in trying to delve deep into the realm of social media. I drifted to sleep at some point only to be scared awake because of an intense pressure resting on my throat. Michael was standing over me with a wide smile, gripping the handle of a kitchen knife. I wasn't able to ask what he was doing due to the sudden fear that filled me. He pushed the blade harder and harder against my neck until I could feel a burning sensation. He laughed maniacally before running out of the room. I wiped the small amount of blood from my neck while searching the entire house, only to panic when he was nowhere to be found. The sound of a cat screeching caused a breath to hitch in my throat. I quickly grabbed the baseball bat from the linen closet and hurried up the stairs. My hand hesitantly grabbed the doorknob to Michael's bedroom. I pushed the door open, which I still regret to this day. My screams of terror were drowned out by his laughter. Michael was sitting in the open doorway of his closet, with the carcass of the cat lying in his lap. I really do wish I could say that the horror had ended there, but it didn't. No. That twisted boy chased after me, attempting to slice my back open with every step he took. The deranged psychopath managed to get close enough to plunge the knife into my shoulder. Needless to say, I ran out of the front door and didn't stop until I was hunched over trying to catch my breath, a block away from the police station. I packed up my things a few months after that, moved into an apartment with my now husband 1,000 miles away from the town that I grew up in. I had to move 1,000 miles away from Psycho Michael in order to feel safe, but even that made me crazier. I attended therapy for several years afterward. I couldn't sleep without the lights on because the image of him holding a dead cat had permanently seared itself into my mind. I was paranoid for months, afraid that he would jump out from behind a corner, and yet I still harbored the idea of having my own children one day. Truth be told, I honestly did care about the Cooper kids, but after the injuries I suffered, physical and psychological, my parents and I had no other choice but to press charges, at the very least to pay for medical bills and counseling. Michael, being as young as he was committed to a psychiatric treatment in juvenile detention for nearly 3 to 5 years from what I heard. But after all the legal processes were complete, I couldn't bring myself to digging any deeper as to not relive that memory. Looking back on the incident now makes me feel silly for even being scared of a 10-year-old. It's strange how life works sometimes. It's strange how I just froze there. I eventually realized that I don't want children, and I absolutely refuse to babysit for anyone. Babysitting wasn't the job that I had imagined having while I was a senior in high school. I was paid a decent rate by the hour for watching kids that only needed to have an adult around while their parents were out. I know exactly what you're thinking. Why would you willingly waste your time watching children when you could have been working retail or some other halfway decent job? Am I close? Well, as you can imagine, the majority of kids I've looked after were happy, normal children, but my sister's children, let me get to that. Here's a little background just to help you better understand why I don't foresee myself having children anytime soon, if ever. I'm a male and a social outcast at that. I was 16 when my mom told me that I'd be babysitting for my older sister. Naturally, I shrugged it off as it were no big deal because, what's the worst that could happen, right? My sister needed to go out of town on a business trip for 2 days, which then caused my mom to decide that I was the right candidate for the job. I learned very quickly that kids are hungry literally every 5 minutes, and they have no respect for the babysitter, and they are totally out of control without their parents around. That was a bummer. Kids are perceived as sweet, innocent, and all-around pure, yet I have first-hand experience on just how truly creepy some kids can be. I have been around my nieces and nephews dozens of times before, so there wasn't any reason for me to think that they were a bit peculiar, aside from the fact that I walked in on Nat, short for Natalie, attempting to sacrifice her sister to the devil in order to bargain for immortality by shoving Lux's hand into a blender. Luckily, I was able to pry her away from the blender before she could turn it on. I had been watching them for less than 20 minutes when that incident occurred. Fast forward to this first afternoon, the kids were playing in the toy room, so I decided to watch television before doing my homework. I was in the middle of a funny movie when I cut the side of my neck with scissors. He drew a pentagram on the floor with ketchup, chanted something in a language that I didn't recognize, they probably made it up, and locked Jay in the basement. Tony was the good kid who explained that Mike was trying to summon a demon, someone that is close to the devil so that he could bargain Jay's soul for immortality. Mike angrily hissed at me when the plan didn't work. I swear to God, those freaking creepypastas they watch really don't help them. It was then that I learned that they had a crazy obsession with vampires. The need to be immortal and trying to draw blood from people is their way to fulfill the desire to be like the people in movies or books. These kids were actually trying to figure out ways that they could become immortal without having to stay so small for all of eternity. I thought that was a bit unhealthy. I still have no idea how the internet or horror movies, when their parents weren't looking, really activated this, but I'm honestly still scared of what could have happened. Nat was the eldest child. She was the bad influence on her siblings. She was the entire reason why everything went down on the second night. I was studying for a calculus test that I had the next day. The kids were supposed to be playing in the backyard, which was the mistake. All I really remember about studying is that I had been exhausted from chasing around those brats the night before because I ended up falling asleep at the kitchen table. I woke up sometime in the afternoon with my hands and feet tied to a metal pipe in the basement, while my deranged nieces and nephews stood over me with a weird look in their eyes. I struggled for a good 10 minutes to free myself from that stupid rope as they chanted some weird language again. I assumed that they were really trying to sacrifice me. However, I was relieved when I saw one of the cats knock a candle off the windowsill. The carpet and lengthy silk curtains immediately caught fire, which caused the kids to untie me. We rushed out of the house and to safety just in time to watch the house burn, literally to the ground. I stood motionless for what seemed like hours before eventually the police were called by the neighbors. I called my mom to come get the kids before being questioned by police for over 3 hours. The detective that was interrogating me surely was about to arrest me, but the fire department later ruled that the fire was an accident. My sister angrily barged into my room once she arrived home and informed me that I was no longer allowed to babysit her kids again, and literally almost beat me senseless if it wasn't for my parents stopping her fury. I cried tears of joy at the news and never babysat again. I tried to explain the story to both the detectives and my family, though my nieces and nephews' stories all apparently corroborated against my own, and there was nothing I could do. Needless to say, I never visited their family again, both by being shunned and by choice. Natalie and the other kids all grew out of the vampire phase from what I heard once they hit junior high and acquired less creepy, less dangerous interests. I'm 28 years old now, incredibly far away from my family, married to the most amazing woman, yet I still refuse to think about having children. You never know what they're going to get into.
I've had a lot of scary experiences, but I really think this one's the scariest. It was October 2015, and my sister was giving birth, and I was babysitting her son, who was 9 at the time. The second night I was there, this happened. I'd put my nephew to bed in his room, and then the dog in his cage in my sister's room, which I have to get past to get to his room. I then go downstairs and I get on YouTube on my computer. Well, about an hour later, I hear a door slam. I just assume it's my nephew going to the bathroom. I then hear another slam. I assume it's just him wanting privacy, and I then hear a third door slam yet again. I don't know how to explain it, but I kinda just knew that it wasn't my nephew. I kept hearing things being moved around, kinda like a dresser being moved across the floor. I then start to remember that this house was built not as a regular house back in the day. The attic is apparently connected to the house next door. All you have to do is go up the attic, walk a little, then lift the top and climb down the ladder. I had no choice but to go check on my nephew. I'm still hearing noises as I go up. I hear the dog in his cage going absolutely crazy, like he was trying to get out or something. I walk halfway up the stairs, then all of the noise just stops. I look in his room, and he's sleeping with his door open. There was no way in hell I was going to walk past that pitch black room. In my mind, As long as he was safe, that's all that mattered. I then walked back downstairs. As soon as I walked back downstairs, I then hear footsteps running, followed by a door slam. Well, the next day I decided to tell my sister and brother-in-law. After I told them, what they said next to me chilled me to my core. Without any concern in the world, they went on to tell me that it was the spirit of our dead neighbor. Now, you're probably thinking, why didn't I just call the cops already? Well, I wasn't really thinking straight at the time. I was just way too scared, and I guess now it's a good thing that I didn't. A few weeks later, my mom had told my oldest niece, who was 16 at the time. She said that whenever she was in there, she always felt the feeling of being watched. To this day, I still don't know if I believe it was a ghost, or maybe an actual living intruder. All I know is that I for sure wasn't alone that night besides my nephew and I. Never again will I babysit there. Screw that. I think I was only 13 years old when this happened. I would be paid extra since I was going to be babysitting so many kids. I don't recall how many, but there were a lot. The reason why I was trusted with so many was because I knew them since my parents and their parents were all friends growing up, making us kind of form into a group. Now, I was the oldest out of every single kid, which was the reason I was in charge. Of course, it was going to be a long night, knowing that our parents would be at some bar far away until like around 2 in the morning, and then stay at a hotel. For some background, I knew the kids and they knew me. I being the oldest, 13 at the time, and the youngest being around 4. There was definitely a little bit of an age gap. The majority of the kids were around 9 to 10. Anyway, the parents left, and when they did, it was already around 4 in the afternoon. About 2.5 hours later, I made dinner for them. We sat down and everyone ate their pasta. Because all the kids were together and they all knew each other, things got pretty crazy. I won't go into detail on exactly what went down, but some of the kids were just totally wild. I didn't really mind it though. It was pretty funny at the same time, but that's besides the point. So after a couple more hours, it was getting pretty late. I recall it being around 11:30 when kids were starting to settle down. I had to take care of some of the kids who injured themselves by doing some really stupid stuff that was really dangerous, and I couldn't make it in time since I had to deal with some other problems as well. But I would consider myself a very caring and kind person because I always did what I needed to do to calm them down. So like I said, it was around 11:30 when they were starting to settle down, and then not too long after, they were starting to pass out. I brought and carried them upstairs and put half of them in one of the 2 kids' rooms. For the sake of keeping the real names out, basically we were at the house that belonged to the Abels family. Ava and Dom were the kids in the family, making it their house. I put half the kids in Dom's room and the other half in Ava's room. They passed out very quickly after that. I went back downstairs to chill out and then listen to some music. After listening to music for a while, Ava comes downstairs, and this is where things start to take a turn for the worst. I had to look because I was listening so loud that I couldn't even hear her calling my name. She then said in a really scared tone, "Something keeps being thrown at the window in my room. I'm really scared." I was a little uneasy to be hearing this since this was such a weird thing to be happening at this time of night. I gave her a hug and I assured her that everything would be alright and that I would go check it out. The bedrooms were on the 3rd floor, so this was especially weird since the room's windows were really high up. I went into Ava's room and I saw that the kids were sleeping. I guess no one else had heard the something hitting the window. I started to think that Ava was just making this up or something. I went back downstairs and I went to the couch where Ava was. I was a bit surprised to see that Ava wasn't there. This is when I then hear something from downstairs. It sounded like a muffled girl scream for help. I quickly ran down there to see Ava in the garage, then being dragged out of the garage by a dark figure. Someone had forgotten to close the garage door, so it was just open. I was so scared and I went into full-on panic mode. I then went back inside to go grab a weapon or something that I can use in quick defense. I found this spear-looking thing that's used for fires and also pushing wood in other areas. I picked it up, then ran outside to look for Ava. I soon saw Ava and this really dark figure, which was taking Ava in the backwoods. I then hit the dark figure in the back of the knee, practically stabbing the figure since it had a sharp edge on the side of it. The figure fell back and let out a yell of pain, which is when I grabbed Ava and then practically carried her back into the house. Very stupidly, I left the weapon I had outside. Since I was in a panic, I think that I just didn't have time to think about it since Ava was the main priority for me. I get back inside and close the garage door, hoping that was the end of it. I decided not to call the cops because I get really nervous when it comes to cops, so I just wanted to avoid that. I ran upstairs but tried not to make too much noise to see if any of the kids were awake due to hearing the commotion from outside. There were only about 2 kids who were awake, and they asked what was happening. I told them to just fall back asleep and that there was a situation that happened. They really wanted to know what, but I just told them I'll tell them in the morning. I really don't blame them. I think I would also want to know what was happening, especially after all that commotion. So anyway, I go back downstairs on the couch where Ava thankfully was this time, and she falls asleep with the comfort of me there the whole time. Fast forward to the morning. It's around 7:30 and I can hear some commotion from upstairs. The kids were up and playing. Ava had woke me up and she was really happy to see me there. I think I really made her feel safe. After that night, me and Ava's connection was a little bit different from before. As the story is becoming better, the final spook is yet to come, so get ready. I walked downstairs to see if anything had been stolen. I checked and I didn't really see anything out of the ordinary. Well, nothing out of the ordinary, except for one thing. There happened to be a paper that was in the garage. It was taped to the sliding door, and I think that's why I paid attention to it. I started to read it, and it said one word: revenge. I was really scared reading this because how the hell could someone have put this here? Then reality hit me that someone had to have come inside after the garage door had been closed, which is when I thought we were safe. I haven't shared this story with Ava because I don't want her to feel scared or threatened more than she probably already does. I do still have a few questions left unanswered though. Who did this? Why did they target this house specifically? And last but not least, did the intruder purposely try and take Ava out of everyone there? Why did he want her specifically? I know I'll probably never have my answers to these questions, but it's absolutely chilling to think about. I'm a female, and I'm 15 years old. This all started a couple months back when I got my very first job as a babysitter. I babysit on Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays. Keep that in mind. The people I babysit for don't even live that far away from my house. Their house is like a block away from me. So by now you've probably guessed that I walk to work. Now, I've always been a very cautious person, and also a paranoid one, so keep that in mind too. The first time it happened was after a month of doing my job. One day I got done babysitting and I just walked to my friend's house that's a couple of blocks away from their house. So as I'm walking there, I hear someone behind me. I should also mention that I was Snapchatting my friend to let her know how far away from the house I was. Anyways, I hear someone behind me, so I turn around and see this guy on a bike right behind me. I didn't think too much about it, but I was keeping him in mind. I don't pay much attention to him and I keep Snapchatting, just in case he tries something. I then turn to the left, and so does he. At this point I'm really aware now of what this guy's doing. I'm pretty sure he's following me. The guy looked tall as hell, and I'm only 5'5". So again I make a turn, and so does he. By now I'm getting pretty panicked and I'm very much aware that this guy is following me. Anytime I slowed down, so would he. If I sped up, again so did he. My friend's house comes into view and I speed walk over there with him telling me. I reach her front door and I start knocking, and then I hear someone say,
"Hey, you better watch out. I'll get you."
And I turn around and the guy was right behind me in front of her house. By this point I'm very panicked, but I just keep knocking, and before she answers, this guy then pulls something out. At first I didn't know what it was until I looked a little closer, And you guessed it. The guy literally pulled out his penis. Right as he does that, I pull my phone up and I catch him in the act, and my friend then opens the door. She lets me inside and she asks me why I'm shaking. I then show her the video and she tries calming me down. Fast forward a week later as I'm walking to my job and I see him yet again. My heart instantly drops and I just speed walk to the lady's house which I work for. He didn't really say anything. It was more like he was just watching me this time. This happened every single time that I would walk to work. But he wouldn't try anything because it would be daytime, and most of the time someone was around. That all changed when they asked me to babysit their daughter at 10 p.m. I wasn't really going to walk to work alone, so I asked the lady if she'd come pick me up instead. She did, and of course nothing happened. We then started doing that until I was calm enough to walk by myself to work. The following week, she asked me again to babysit at night, so I decided to take a knife with me just in case something happens, and I told my mom goodbye. I walked out in the really dark street, and the lights in that area weren't really good, which is why I was so scared to walk there in the first place. But anyways, I was walking to work, and I then hear a crunch behind me. My body then immediately tenses up. I knew someone was there, but I really dreaded thinking it was him. I decide not to look back, but instead just speed walk again. For a few minutes I didn't even hear anything, but I then turn around, and there he fucking is. I don't say a single word and just straight up bolt to their house. I tell them what happened and she told me not to worry and that he wouldn't do anything, then left me to babysit. Fast forward the second day and I walked to work and nothing happened this time. I was checking all my surroundings like a really crazy person, but no one was there. I then turn and knock on their door, and from the corner of my eye, I see movement. I look and this guy's leaning out from behind trash cans, and I barely caught him. My heart started going crazy. I then knocked harder on the door, and I saw him from the corner of my eyes just looking at me. He probably didn't even know I saw him, but I did. Fast forward the next day, and the walk to work wasn't really that much. I didn't see him, but the walk back, that's a different story. I was walking back, and I think it was about 12 a.m. I texted my mom that I was on my way home, and she told me to stop by the store. Now, this store is like right across from our house, so it wasn't really a big deal. This weird creep follows me, all the while making kids noises and saying really weird things like I love you over and over again. I just walked to the store, and this guy literally stands right in front of the store. I get very angry at this point, and I tell the cashier what's going on. He then looks at the guy for a minute and then tells him to leave. He says he wants to buy something, but the guy just tells him to leave. Well, he doesn't leave and he just keeps on standing there. So I then say to him, "Why are you following me?" He then says back,
I'm not following you.
and I said, "Yeah, sure you're not." And I just stand in line and get my stuff and then walk out the door. The guy has the audacity to continue following me, all while making kissing sounds and then repeatedly saying,
I love you. I'd die for you.
I was just so fucking mad at this point that I snap back and say, "Look, fuck off, you creep. Leave me the fuck alone already," with a very angry tone. This doesn't even have an effect on this guy, and he just keeps repeating the same shit. I then tell him, "Look, I know where you live, and I'll tell your mom about this, because I've actually seen him leave the apartments that are near the store." Anyways, he doesn't even care what I'm saying, and he's making eye contact with me the entire time. I just walk to my house, and I finally get there, but right before I get inside and slam the door, I then say to him, "If you ever follow me again, you're gonna fucking regret it." He responds to this by laughing, then saying,
Oh yeah? What the hell are you gonna do?
and proceeds to blow me a kiss. I then just walk inside, feeling very numb. I had just finally got home and I just started sobbing. My sister asked what was happening, and I told her everything. She's extremely overprotective with me, and she got really pissed off after I told her. She tells me that she's gonna walk me to work and that if we see him, she's gonna kill the guy. Obviously, I know that's not true, but it really made me feel better. All of this happened last week, and today in a couple of hours, I have to babysit again. I know it doesn't seem like much, but I'm still really scared of what will happen to me in the future. I really don't even know what to do at this point. If any of you guys that are listening have some advice, please tell me what to do. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and if anything else happens, I'll definitely give you guys an update. Be safe out there.
In June of 1969, 6-year-old Dennis Martin accompanied his family on a camping trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a mountain range rising along the Tennessee-North Carolina border in the southeastern United States. The name Great Smoky Mountains comes from the natural fog that often hangs over the range, appearing as large smoke plumes from a distance. Interestingly, this fog is caused by chemicals emitted from the local flora, chemicals that have a high vapor pressure and easily form vapors at normal temperature and pressures. Yet even having heard the scientific explanation behind the phenomenon, seeing all that fog clinging to the hilltops is a very eerie sight indeed. Hailing from nearby Knoxville, Tennessee, the Martin family had a long-running tradition of celebrating Father's Day by taking camping trips to the Great Smoky Mountains. In 1969 would mark young Dennis's first trip into the woods, in the company of his father, older brother, and grandpa. The group drove out to Cades Cove, an isolated valley located in the Tennessee section of the park, then hiked out towards Russell Field, where they set up camping and began preparing for their first night under the stars. The following morning, they set off for a place known as Spencefield, a picturesque highland meadow and popular camping spot, which was bisected by the rolling hills and jagged mountain peaks of the Appalachian Trail. When the group arrived at Spencefield, Dennis and his older brother set off to explore the campsite, and reportedly talked to many of the other campers who had pitched their tents nearby. This is how they got talking to a ragtag group made up of other campers' children who made fast friends with the Martin boys. Dennis' father was pleased to see his son getting along so well with the other kids, and having his sons occupied meant the adults could get on with the important task of assembling their 4-man tent. Once the task was completed, Dennis was still playing with the group of other kids, and his father says he watched as the group gleefully took up hiding positions from which to playfully ambush a group of approaching adults. When the grown-ups entered the kids' make-believe kill zone, they all jumped out, growling and roaring like wild animals as they set upon their laughing parents. All but one. All but little Dennis. His father watched with growing concern as the seconds ticked by, and Dennis had yet to emerge from his hiding spot. Eventually he couldn't bear it anymore, and after rising from his camping chair, Dennis's father marched off the spot where he had last seen his 6-year-old son and began calling out his name. But what started out as stern fatherly commands soon degenerated into terrified pleas, and as he continued to call out in desperation, the other families began to realize that something was terribly wrong. Once Dennis's grandpa knew he was missing, he set the group into action, sending one group 2 miles up the Appalachian Trail with his son, while he led another group back towards the Cades Cove Ranger Station, arriving there around 8:30 p.m. that night. Thus began an extensive, well-publicized search and rescue operation, in which National Park Service personnel was supplemented by National Guard soldiers and even a unit of Green Berets. At the peak of the search operation, more than 1,400 people were operating in the few square miles around Spencefield, but not a single one found anything that could lead them to the missing boy. However, in the aftermath of the operation, the search efforts drew a great deal of criticism from search and rescue experts far and wide, who said the large number of personnel involved potentially obscuring tracks in ground that was already difficult to track over due to heavy rain. Shockingly, a shoe print belonging to that of a child was actually found at one point, but the track was dismissed as belonging to one of the Boy Scouts that was helping with the search. Later, however, investigators kicked themselves when they found that the tracks were determined to have come from a child who was missing one shoe, which disappeared on the banks of a stream. Some suggesting it was possible that the tracks belonged to Martin, and this theory was supported when a discarded child-sized shoe and sock were found just 3 days later. Although search and rescue personnel continued their search for more than 2 weeks, scouring the hillsides night and day in continual shifts, no further clues to Martin's whereabouts were ever found. The Martin family was so understandably desperate for answers that they offered a $5,000 reward for any information that would reunite them with their beloved Dennis. This got the attention of a handful of so-called psychics, who some might argue sought to exploit the Martin family's grief and maybe cashing in if they guessed the right area of the Smokies to search. Surprisingly, none of these psychics ever proved to be of any help. Many years later, in 1985, a man who had apparently been illegally collecting American ginseng in the park claimed to have come across the skeletal remains of a child while exploring the woods. The man said he should have reported the find, but was terrified of being prosecuted for his prohibited herbal hobby. Not only that, but he was also unable to point investigators in the direction of the site he'd found the bones in the first place. There have been many theories that have attempted to explain what happened to young Dennis Martin that day. Most detectives, both amateur and professional, believe that Dennis became disoriented whilst looking for a hiding place, maybe even forgetting his way back to camp when he emerged from it. Either way, Dennis then strayed further from the camp and could easily have fallen down one of the many steep slopes and ravines that dotted the area surrounding Spencefield. However, Dennis was wearing a bright red t-shirt when he went missing, not something that would be easy for search and rescue teams to miss. Dennis would have to be completely covered in foliage to remain undetected with that color of shirt, and despite it being feasible due to his small size, the likelihood of that is extremely low. Others are quick to remind us of the presence of black bears in the area, as well as copperhead vipers and feral pigs, all of which would have posed a considerable threat to 6-year-old Martin. Park rangers told investigating police that an underweight bear had been caught in a boar trap in the Spencefield area just 2 weeks earlier. Although the bear was released safely, the incident suggested that it may have been struggling to find enough food, prompting to turn to a less familiar source of food. Yet, however tragic and brutal the aforementioned theories are, Dennis's father believes something considerably more sinister. Based on the eyewitness account of one Harold Key, who says he heard a loud scream on the very same afternoon that Dennis disappeared, Dennis's dad firmly believed that his son was kidnapped by an opportunistic predator. Shortly after he heard the scream, Harold Key claimed to have seen a disheveled, bearded man with wild, unkempt hair fleeing through the woods in an apparent bid to remain undetected by the nearby campers. Harold's family went on to explain that they saw a flash of red on the figure's shoulders, which some believe was actually Dennis himself, slung over the shoulder of this mysterious figure as they carried him away. Harold later speculated that the man may have been a moonshiner, explaining his reluctance to be seen. Despite the report, FBI investigators ultimately dismissed it, saying that as much as Harold meant well, his account was frankly unreliable as his timeline of events were off. But one retired park ranger lamented the failure to properly follow up either the footprints or the sighting of the rough-looking man, arguing that as the location of the sighting was downhill from where Dennis disappeared, it was possible to cover that distance in the time frame, even carrying a child, but that the individual in question would have some impressive strength, stealth, and endurance. So if this is the case, who is this hairy mystery man? This bearded vagrant who was apparently capable of such an impressive physical feat, even if it was in the context of the despicable abduction of a child. Given the lack of investigation into his sighting or his tracks, it seems we might never know. But even if we did get to the bottom of the mystery of a man living in the Appalachian Mountains with a penchant for kidnapping children, I don't think the answers would bring us any solace. Maybe the closure would be worth it, especially for the family, but nightmares can be a high price to pay, and wondering what happened to young Dennis Martin can give even the most hardened true crime reader some very sleepless nights.
I was 13 years old when this happened on Halloween night in 2015. Since I'd been sitting around all day, at 9 p.m. I decided to go for a walk out in the woods. It was one of my favorite things to do, since everything looked so different out in the dark and that there were no people around. I really loved the cool night air and the spooky feeling of the woods and the nearby pond. I'd started walking past my neighbor's blue house when they were having a huge Halloween party. There were flashing lights at the windows and music blaring, and I could hear all the drunk people raving in the yard. But soon enough, I had made it to the quiet woods like I had planned. As I was walking on the forest path, I started to feel very nervous and paranoid. I couldn't really see where I was going, and eventually had to take my earbuds off to be more aware of my surroundings. The feeling of uneasiness started to fade for a moment as I made it through the woods and onto a street near the one I lived on. I turned the corner back to my street, my earbuds back on, and blasting Nightcore, now almost relieved that I was almost home. I started to think I was being stupid for getting so jumpy over nothing, but then a thin figure appeared from behind the still lively blue house, and I immediately tensed back up. As the figure got closer, I placed my house keys between my fingers like I learned from the internet and tried to make out what I was seeing. The figure was a man, fairly tall, bald, and wearing a black suit. He was also ghost white, and due to my poor vision, I literally almost shit myself thinking it was Slender Man himself coming to take me. A moment later though, I noticed that he did in fact have a face, and he had painted it to look like a skull. The man was obviously wasted, and he was staggering in a zigzag motion across the empty street right towards me. For a split second, I was hoping he was too hammered to even notice me, but that hope quickly faded as he made his way right to me. I was absolutely paralyzed with fear. My house was only 2 houses away, but I'd have to get past this unpredictable man, and I had no idea if I could outrun him with my asthma. Panicking, I was considering other ways to get away from him into safety. Could I turn back and maybe take a long way around to the other end of my street? No. It's dark. There's no one around, and I could definitely not run for that long. Can I make it to my grandma's house? Can't do that either. There's no guarantee that she's awake or even home. As I was trying to decide, my thoughts were interrupted as the man put a hand tightly on my shoulder. He started speaking, but I couldn't hear him properly due to my music still playing in my ears. All I managed to hear was him questioning what girl my age was doing out alone so late at night. I could only stand there and stare. The man then paused, raised his arm, and then pointed a finger to the woods behind the houses and then said something. It was at this point that I decided if I didn't do something, soon my body would definitely end up being found in the woods. I looked at the woods, then at the guy, shook him off, and broke into a full-on sprint past him at my house, crossing some of that blue house's property. At my front door, I was furiously stabbing my key into the old rusting lock with my shaky hands, fearing that any second that man would come grab me from behind and drag me into the dark forest on the other side of my yard. I finally managed to get inside and made sure the door stayed locked before I could finally breathe again. I threw my shoes off and made my way into the basement as my tears started rolling down my face. Sobbing, I had told my older brother what was going on, and together we called our parents who weren't home at the time. They said they would check it out, and we didn't call the police, since it was a little town and no harm was actually done. The next day, my dad had informed me that the drunk man was actually just one of the taxi drivers in our town, and we just never spoke of it again. It's 6 years later, and I still get extremely nervous going outside after dark, even though I don't live anywhere near that place anymore. I've told this story to my friends a few times, and it honestly sort of annoys me that I didn't get as much as an apology from that guy. I really honestly hate the whole town, and the fact that no one there does anything when things like this happen. I'm glad I live in a bigger place now, where we at least have street lights. I'm only 19, and I've honestly experienced enough scary and traumatizing things for 2 lifetimes. That being said, I'm very street smart and always have been. I live right in front of the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. This particular story happened when I was in 8th grade. Names have been changed for obvious reasons. My friend Jess threw a little Halloween party at her house on the night of Halloween. There were 4 other girls as well as 2 guys besides me and Jess. Megan, Cara, Emily, Bella, Chris, and Zach. Everything was going just fine, and we all took pictures in our costumes, and then took Jess's little cousin trick-or-treating around the neighborhood for a while. I'd also like to add that this was in a decent neighborhood, and crime doesn't really happen in this area. After taking her cousin trick-or-treating, We went back to Jess's house and grabbed hoodies since it was getting cold out, and we decided to walk around. Jess grabbed her Beats pill, and the 8 of us walked around the neighborhood together with the music on low, just barely enough to hear it unless you were near. We didn't see anyone out trick-or-treating anymore, so we decided to go park near Jess's house. It was about 9 o'clock or so at this point, so it really wasn't too late at all. The playground and the swings were at least 50 yards from the sidewalk, and you had to walk through a large open field in order to get to it. The playground was hidden due to a bunch of large trees surrounding the playground. You would really only be able to see it if you were walking on the sidewalk or in the trees. Once we got to the playground, we all put our phones and Jess put her Beats pill on the park bench, and we headed straight to the playground to just hang out. Everybody was all having their own individual conversations with one another, considering there were 8 of us. I was sitting next to Cara and Jess on the playground, while Mega, Emily, Bella, and Chris were sitting on those bars/walls of the playground. Zach was the only one not on the playground. When we all briefly glanced at a group of men with their hoods up, coming right out of the trees near the sidewalk that was about 40 yards away. They weren't doing anything, but they were beginning to walk along the sidewalk that we were just on before. We didn't really think anything of it, so we just minded our business and continued chatting amongst each other. About a minute or so later, everybody gets quiet, and Cara jumps up randomly and begins running off the playground. Roughly 2 seconds later, I see Megan, Bella, Emily, Chris, and Zach all gone and out of sight. Jess and I were sitting on the playground, a bit hidden, and were very confused as to what was going on. I then turned around, and I saw either 5 or 6 men, all dressed in black, each wearing masks, all with long knives or metal baseball bats in their hands. They weren't running, but they were walking very fast towards us. I knew there was something wrong the second I saw their demeanor, almost like they were up to something. And for anyone asking how I knew they were men, they were very tall and had a really big build underneath whatever they were wearing. I looked at Jess, and she was just as scared as I was, considering all our friends had left us behind without even saying a word. The men were right next to the park benches that we had left our phones on, still walking fast. And Jess, not thinking clearly, decides to run up to the park bench and grab her Beats pill, out of fear that they were going to steal it. I waited for her, because I knew I couldn't live with it if she got caught by them. At this point, Jess starts running back towards me so we can get the hell out of there. Jess and I start panicking on what to do or where to go because this park is so secluded and all we're surrounded by is trees. I turn to see where my friends went, and I see a couple of them climbing rocks that led to a fence that basically has nothing but forest behind it. That's when I then see a couple of the men start chasing after them on the rocks, and I instantly had to think because I knew that the other men were coming up right behind Jess and I. Jess and I ran towards the end of the fence because we knew we wouldn't get up the rocks fast enough. Jess immediately made it to the other side of the fence where our other friends were, while I, being the 4'11" girl that I am, was absolutely struggling to get over the fence. I looked to my left to see where the men were, and 2 men were sprinting right towards me as they noticed I was struggling to get over the fence. And I swear, maybe 5 seconds before one of the men caught up to me, I was actually able to make it over. At this point, I didn't know where anybody was, and I was all alone. I could see the 2 men getting ready to hop the fence to come after me, and that's when I took off running. I tried to stay low though, because I knew that the other 3 men were still around somewhere, and I didn't know if they had my friends or what the hell was going on. My first instinct was to find the first house I could with the lights on, and luckily enough, it wasn't long before I did. I ran straight through their backyard and then started pounding on their door, without a single care in the world of how creepy that must have been for them. Luckily, they were having a party too, and after I explained the whole situation quickly, the guys in that house went out into the trees to go find these men and go look for my friends. All of my friends and I were safely at this house by this point, but the men that went to go look for them weren't back yet. The ladies in the house called the cops and explained the situation, and about 5 minutes later, the guys from the house came back, and one of them had actually been punched in the face. The cops eventually arrived and checked everywhere we had been. They didn't even see anybody walking in the area, but they did find all our phones still sitting on the bench where we left them. This might not be that scary to some, but it was truly terrifying for me and those I was with, considering we weren't bothering anybody. One of the guys trying to help us got punched. They all had weapons of some sort, and they clearly weren't trying to rob us, or they would have taken our phones that were right there. I never found out who those men were or what their intentions were with their weapons. All I know is I never went to a park late at night ever again, and neither should you. I actually had a pretty decent scare back when I was 14, and I'm in my early 20s now, so some of the more intricate details are a little hazy, but I'll try to tell it as accurately as I can remember. So the story happened on Halloween night in 2013. Me and my 3 friends, Dallas, AJ, and Anthony, had all collectively decided that we would meet up at my house to begin trick-or-treating, as my house was located right next to the wealthier neighborhood in the city. Our game plan to maximize our trick-or-treating efficiency was to start off at my house, then work our way down towards the nice neighborhood, and then loop around. Before we began, Anthony mentioned that he had bought some weed, and so we all smoked some in the alleyway by my house before we began. We made our way through my neighborhood in a decent bit into the nice neighborhood before we decided to start heading back so we could get to the houses on the opposite side of the street as we started making our way towards my house. Unfortunately, it was already pretty late at this point, and so a lot of the houses had already started turning off their lights. By the time we were almost out of the nicer neighborhood, just about every house had turned their lights off, except for this one that was attached to a bunch of other townhouses. We, being the desperate, candy-starved teenagers that we were, weren't going to let the late hour of the night sway us from our potential earnings. So we all made our way up onto the porch and rang the doorbell. We waited for a decent bit, probably a good 30 seconds, before we finally heard some loud thumping behind the door. It was an older male, probably in his early 40s. He answers the door in a stained tank top and a pair of denim boxers. The guy looked like he hadn't showered or shaved in like a solid week, but he did seem pretty nice though, despite his appearance. And he made some sort of joke about us being the only trick-or-treaters out there, as we had stayed out later than everyone else, and so we deserved a better reward than the rest of them. He told us to wait there just for a moment while he went and got some treats for us. None of us really found his appearance weird, and I partially blame the weed that we'd smoked earlier, as we weren't as paranoid about him as much as we were paranoid that some cops would see us walking down the street and somehow know that we smoked. We heard his thumping footsteps as he walked around his house, and then a couple of minutes later, he then came back with some black DVD boxes. He held them out like a deck of cards, and he told us to take what we wanted. As he said this, he cracked a smile, and I remember thinking about just how gross his yellow, jagged teeth were. We looked at the covers, and they were all adult movies, some of them not even featuring females on the cover. AJ made a comment about the movies, saying we just wanted candy, but the guy just smiled wider with his crooked yellow teeth seeming to stick out of his mouth, and then he said,
I know what kids your age like to do. Don't worry. It's okay. You can trust me. I'm cool.
At this point, me and my friends all began awkwardly shuffling away from the porch, politely declining his offer, when the man put his hands on his underwear, then started rubbing himself as he begged us to stay and then come inside so we could watch movies together. He said that he'd let us eat all the candy we want, and other really disturbing things. While he was still going on his tangent, me and my friends all collectively decided to book it towards my house. Pillowcases full of candy awkwardly being shuffled in our arms. We ran out of the nice neighborhood and down this large hill that the nice neighborhood sat on top of, before forking it left onto the city street that would lead to my house. Before we made it out of the nice neighborhood, I remember looking back and seeing the grown man chase after us for the first part, but then giving up shortly after and going back into his house. We eventually made it to my house and went directly into the basement through a set of stairs that was in the back of my house. While we were in there, we all collectively talked about just how insane what happened was, and we wondered if the weed we smoked had made it seem weirder or maybe more normal than it actually was. Either way, we egged his house the next day, and we never went back there for Halloween ever again. This event occurred when I was 10 years old on Halloween night. At the time, I was still a stick-thin girl with nothing to actually distinguish that I was a girl. Especially since earlier that year, I decided I didn't want to be confused with my twin sister anymore. So I'd gotten a pixie cut and I had began dressing in black. At the time, I had no girlfriends, but up the road half a mile was my friend Austin and another mile and a half up, Quinn. I had really become close with them and would often go exploring and fishing with them, so it was only natural that we decided that the three of us would go trick-or-treating together. Compared to Austin in my neighborhood, Quinn's was the more wealthier one, so in hopes of getting the best candy, we decided we'd go to Quinn's. I had been to Quinn's house a few times, but most of the time we hung out, we'd walk another mile up from Quinn's to the Rudders, which was our local gas station for Slurpees, and then another 2 miles down from my house to the park and lake. So Austin and I weren't too familiar with this neighborhood and the ones around it. But I digress. My mother had a new boyfriend at the time, so she didn't really care what I was doing. She would have gotten mad if she'd known I was hanging out with boys again. It was Pennsylvania, so it was super cold. So any costume I had on was pretty much covered with my jacket and leggings. I had been a dark fairy, so you could still guess what I was just because of the black sparkly wings. Anyways, I had left early to go walk to Austin's house. When I got there, I had to ask Austin what he was because he was in a white button-up, black dress pants, as well as a tie and a heavy black jacket over it. He moved his jacket to show me the cheap sheriff's badge attached to his belt and told me he was a detective. I had laughed and his parents shooed us away. I remember his dad grumbling about what was a boy doing with sparkly wings, when I then realized he'd been talking about me, which definitely dampened my spirits. Austin's dad was drinking though, so I didn't correct him. Austin attempted to cheer me up the entire way to Quinn's house, and soon all was forgotten. Quinn's house was the biggest house I had ever been at the time. It was in a really nice neighborhood with houses on each side that looked just like his. Quinn's mother welcomed us warmly, and she had gave us treats to start off our trick-or-treating. Quinn definitely had the best costume of all of us. A realistic-looking Grim Reaper robe with a black screen over the face, with red glowing eyes, and a plastic bloody sheath. Quinn's neighborhood was swamped with kids from my school, and soon we had gone through almost the entire neighborhood, with our bags really weighing us down. It was getting late, but Quinn wanted us to continue on, and Austin and I were in no rush to go home, so we agreed despite how dark it was getting. Quinn had told us that there was a shortcut to the other neighborhood through his backyard if we went down the hill and then through the trees for a while. Now, that kinda freaked me out, but being the only girl, I wasn't about to let on that I was scared. So I gulped when this was suggested, but nodded my approval, and off we went. Quinn had taken off his mask to better see as we stumbled down Quinn's backyard and decides to leave his sheath behind. We start through the woods, and within about 5 minutes of walking and joking, we all then realized that none of us had thought to bring a flashlight. But it was fall, so there were no leaves on the trees, and light from the moon really helped to light up the way, if only enough not to walk into a tree. Austin asks how much longer, and I can tell by the hitch in his voice that he likes this shortcut just about as much as I do. Before Quinn can answer, we hear a crunch from somewhere up ahead of us, and we all freeze as Quinn sticks up a hand in the air to silence us. "Did you guys hear that?" Quinn says. I remain silent, but Austin snorts and replies, "Stop it, Quinn. That's not going to work. You're not going to scare us." Quinn gasps and then says, "I'm not joking. I really thought I heard something." And before I can tell them both just to keep walking, a shape in the darkness catches my eyes. It's up ahead of us, maybe 20 feet. It's dark, so I can't really distinguish anything, but it's only a moment later that no guessing is needed.
"Well, hey there, boys,"
came a strange man's reply from the spot. Quinn and Austin turn in horror as the man continues to walk towards us. "What? Who are you?" stammers Quinn. With this, a deep laugh bellows out of the man.
Oh, me? I'm the devil.
This whole time he's walking closer to us, but in the silhouette of darkness, I see no signs of this man wearing a costume. No horns or anything. This is my property. What are you doing in the woods? Quinn demands, sounding less brave with each syllable.
Oh, me? I'm just out for a stroll. I don't really get out nearly as often as I'd like.
He responds smoothly. Now he's about 10 feet from us, halfway peeking out from behind a tree. Quinn, let's just get out of here, I say. But Quinn, in a moment of bravery or stupidity, which is debatable, yells out to the man. What the hell's wrong with you? Stop talking to us. We're just trying to get through. And with that, Quinn nudges Austin and I and begins making a wide turn around the man, who silently watches us and spins around the tree with just his head and hands sticking out to watch us as we walk past. Austin then says to me, "It's Halloween. He's just trying to scare us." I don't respond, just keep my eyes locked on the man. He then yells,
I hope I haven't scared you boys. I just really like your costumes. Why don't you come closer and let me have a better look?
Immediately that comment sent up red flags to me, because you couldn't tell what Austin was, especially at a distance, and with Quinn's hood and sheath gone, you couldn't tell what he was either. That left me, and I didn't like that.
Hey you, boy with the wings. Come over here. Let me help you fly.
And with that, he just started laughing again. Now, I had been getting bullied for how short my hair was, and Quinn and Austin knew how much it hurt me every time I was mistaken for a boy, so they had taken up to sticking up for me, and unfortunately, tonight was no exception. Hey, stop talking to her, you creep! Austin yelled, and with that, he picked up a rock and threw it at the man. It bounced off the tree where the man was half covered, and the man suddenly did a creepy little half jump, half dance, and clapped his hands.
Her? You're a girl? That's even better.
And with that, he, much like a wild animal, bounded forward, hands first on all fours. I immediately dropped my candy, and all three of us began screaming our heads off and running. I don't think he chased us long, but with the crunching under our feet and our screams, it was pretty much impossible to tell. I quickly had to abandon my wings too, as they continued to get stuck to branches as we weaved through the trees in pure terror. We didn't stop until we made it through the trees and onto a well-lit street, though there were very few kids out at this point anyway. We were now over 15 minutes away from Quinn's house and probably an hour plus walk back to my house, and it was only getting later. Quinn had dropped his bag too, only Austin kept his, clutching it like it were a child. We took the long-lit way back to Quinn's house in almost complete silence, terrified the man would appear again, but he didn't. When we actually made it, we frantically explained what happened, and though sympathetic, Quinn's mom said we couldn't call the police. She said that nothing had happened, and we had no description of the man, and that it was Halloween. The man was probably long gone, and also was almost definitely just trying to scare us. She drove Austin and I home, and I ended up getting grounded for being out so late and also leaving my costume behind. I didn't even bother to explain what had happened, and she didn't seem to notice that I had no candy. The next day, though, I couldn't go out because I was grounded. Quinn came over with his mom and gave me a bag of candy that they had bought, because he knew I had lost mine in the woods. We never talked about it again after that, all convincing ourselves that it was probably just some creepy Halloween prank that went too far. So did the devil, or whoever you are. I really hope to never see you again, and especially on Halloween. The story happened to my brother, and it's told from his perspective. On Halloween of 2017, I went trick-or-treating with my friends, who I'll call Harvey, Michael, and Daniel. We were all around 14 to 15 years old, and really just wanted to make the most of this Halloween, as we would have had so much homework starting the 10th grade, and we'd probably never be able to trick-or-treat again. Anyway, We were walking down this random street at like 9:30 when we saw this one house with like really insane over-the-top Halloween decorations that looked like they cost up to $500. The four of us walked up to the house and we rang the bell. Some 50-year-old guy opened the door and then said,
No need to yell. Just come in and you'll get your sweets.
Daniel told the guy, can't you just bring the candy out here? The guy didn't even answer, so the four of us just walked away, not saying a single word. But of course, the story wouldn't be scary if it ended here. We were walking down my street when Harvey pointed out, Guys, I think that man is following us. We all looked behind us and we saw that same 50-year-old man walking about 25 feet behind us. The four of us then bolted all the way down to my house. We were all way too scared to even think about revealing where I lived to this psycho. We thrust open the front door, entered my house, and locked the door. The four of us were just hyperventilating, as if we had just run like a 75-mile marathon. I was starting to calm down when Michael then said, Dude, look at the window. We all looked, and there he was. The old man was looking through one of my windows. My parents were on vacation at the time, and my older brother was at his friend's Halloween party, so we couldn't tell them. But what really made this horrifying was I could see the guy holding a Saturday night special in his hand. We all ran upstairs and called the police. The officers arrived in 10 minutes. The man wasn't on my property anymore, but we remembered the house he was in. The cops went there, searched the whole place, and then came out with the man in chains. As it turns out, the house was vacant, and the man was a serial killer who had escaped prison a month ago. If my friends and I are ever able to go trick-or-treating again, we're definitely avoiding the street that house is on. And who really knows what the guy would have really wanted to do to my friends and I, had we been naive enough to enter that house. I will say though, I'm really glad this happened when we were teenagers, and not like 9 years old. All I can say is if you're trick-or-treating, make sure the house owner is completely normal. And if a single thing seems off in the slightest, just walk away.
The scariest thing that ever happened to me on Halloween was back when I was living in Liverpool for university. Halloween is always a big night for students, as is any yearly event that involves dressing up and getting absolutely wasted. But since Halloween is a really good excuse to wear considerably less clothes than usual, party-oriented students tend to get particularly excited about it. So I'm in second year at this point, living with a bunch of my student mates just off Smithton Road, which is where loads of students can get shared houses for really cheap rent. We heard that this big house party was happening just down the road from us, one of those that had its own little Facebook events page set up to keep track of people directions to the house. I remember my mates sitting around the kitchen table, all staring at the screen as they went through all the profiles of girls they said that were attending. I mean, some of them were absolutely gorgeous, so we were all definitely hyped about it. Only just a few days before Halloween, I started to feel really, really grim. I had the shakes. I was running to and from the toilet every half an hour to erupt from both ends, and I could barely keep any food down. This persisted for like 48 hours straight, and thankfully it had abated by Halloween itself, but I still felt way too rough to do any serious partying. The last thing I wanted was to end up browning myself in front of like half the girls at our uni. I mean, every lad wants to be a legend, don't they? But for the right reasons. So anyway, on the day of the house party, despite my mates insisting I make an appearance and throw together a costume, I had made the firm decision to stay at home and chill for the evening. As much as I felt like I'm missing out, I just didn't feel up to it. So about 7-ish, my mates are pre-drinking in the kitchen, while I'm up in my room looking to order the spiciest curry I could get my hands on, in the hopes that it would purge the rest of the sickness out of me, so I could start the following week feeling fresh again. So about the time I'm burning my face off with a little chicken vindaloo, my mates are just about to head off down to the house party for a night of debauchery. There are a few final pleas for me to join them, but these are all violently rebuked. There might have been a chance of me joining them before the curry, but afterwards, no chance. I was in a full-on food coma. So a couple of hours later, I'm just chilling on the couch and wondering why British Netflix had such a dire collection of horror films when there's a knock at our front door. My first thought is that there's been some kind of puke-related disaster and one of the lads had to come back to get a change of clothes before heading back to the house party. I mean, this wasn't entirely out of the question, since the house party was only around the corner, safe staggering distance for anyone that had drank too much too quickly. But it then occurred to me that there was a chance it could have been trick-or-treaters. Smithton has a big mix of residential and student housing, so there's also a decent chance it could have been kids looking for sweets. So to save the house getting egged, I legged it into the kitchen and grabbed a few bits from the cupboards to offer any potential trick-or-treaters. But when I answered the door, Mars bars in hand, there was no one there. Maybe I'd just taken too long grabbing sweets, or maybe it was just some knock-and-run type deal. But either way, there was no one to be seen. So I just head back inside, plonk myself down on the couch, and get back to digesting a ton of curry that I'd just eaten. A short while later, I'm still watching Netflix, about ready to doze off when something in the corner of the living room catches my eye. You know when you're so used to looking at a certain something that just the oddest little difference catches your eye? Well, I happened to notice that there was a little less of the orange streetlights outside coming through the little crack between the curtains and the window. Like this dark shape was outside, standing at the window. I sit up all nervous and it disappears from view, allowing me to see the orange light illuminating the street once again. Someone had been watching me. I got up, rushed to the cupboard under the stairs to grab my housemate's cricket bat, then edged toward the front door. I threw it open, ready to swing at whatever was out there, but again, there was nothing. I started to feel like I was going mental at that point, that maybe I was just exhausted from being sick for most of the week. I hadn't slept very well at all during the few days prior to Halloween, and I tried to reassure myself that maybe I was just a wee bit jumpy from being overtired. I decided it was best that I get an early night, telling myself that I'd feel much better in the morning. I did a bit of washing up, got a shower, then put on some comfy clothes to get ready for bed, but just as I do, there's another knock on the door. Only this time I can clearly hear some young-sounding voice go trick-or-treat from the other side of the door. I'd almost jumped out of my skin when I heard the door go, but the voice was weirdly reassuring. I mean, it was only trick-or-treaters, right? The worst that could happen was I got a few eggs thrown at me or some toilet paper lashed over the house. I walked downstairs, grabbed the handful of Mars bars I'd fished out of the cupboard, then opened up the front door. I was expecting to see a gaggle of school-aged kids, maybe accompanied by an adult supervising them, but there was just one smallish-looking figure stood in the pathway of our shared house. They couldn't have been any older than a teenager, but they definitely looked a little bit too old to be trick-or-treating. I don't imagine that they'd been particularly intimidating otherwise, but the mask they were wearing seriously gave me the creeps. It looked old, like it smelled like disgusting unwashed latex on the inside. I'm not even sure it was meant to be a Halloween mask at all. It was like an old man's face with these tiny black eyes and a big white smile stretching from ear to ear. I made some derisive comment to him like, "Aren't you a bit too old to be trick-or-treating?" But held the handful of Mars bars out towards him anyway. I reckoned he'd just tell me to bugger off and snatch the sweets off me and leg it down the path. But he didn't. The lad just stood there, looking at me from behind the mask, not even moving to take the chocolate bars off me. I asked him if he was all right, starting to actually get creeped out by his behavior on top of the weird old mask he was wearing. But still, he didn't say anything. There was something intensely creepy about not being able to see his actual eyes behind that mask, and the longer we stood there in silence, just staring at each other, the more I felt myself begin to tense up. Then right as I'm about to just give him an awkward goodbye and shut the door, I hear a loud noise coming from behind me. I didn't really think the situation through. I just reacted, running into the kitchen at the back of the house where the noise was coming from, just in time to see someone smash the back door open. About 3 or 4 people then pour into the kitchen, all wearing masks, some armed with bats, others with these big knives in their hands. I turn around, and leg it back towards the front door, planning on running upstairs to my room where my phone was charging to bring the police. But to my absolute horror, blocking the way to the stairs was the little lad with the mask on. Only this time, he had a knife in his hand too. He'd been in on this whole thing that whole time, and as he pointed the knife in my direction, all I could do was raise my hands in this please don't stab me type of way. "Get on the floor," he said, in this voice that seriously sounded like he was no older than about 14. Like he legit sounded like a kid, and that scared me even more. A grown man might have the presence of mind to not hurt anyone and keep the severity of their crimes to a minimum, but a kid, I thought he might just stab me up for the fun of it. I'd heard stories about gangs all over the world making younger kids commit violence to just sort of prove themselves, and that's what had me shaking as I lay down on the carpeted floor in the hallway, face down with my hands on the back of my head. I listened as the gang just completely ransacked the house. I couldn't see exactly what they were taking, but I heard them mentioning laptops and phones a fair bit, laughing to themselves as they absolutely raided each and every room in the house. At some points, I heard smashing and crashing noises as they just took it upon themselves to commit as much wanton destruction as they liked, giggling maniacally to each other as they realized they had the time and freedom to do pretty much whatever they fancied. I thought if I just lay there, keeping still and quiet, that they'd leave me alone. But that was just wishful thinking on my part. Obviously, they had to make their way through the hallway a fair few times, and when they did, they'd either literally walk all over me, which was painful enough, or they'd get in a few kicks here and there just to hear me grimace. I think the worst part of the physical abuse was when I heard one of them say, "Kick him in the balls, lad," to one of their mates. I tried to shut my legs, but they still aimed a few kicks between my thighs. Luckily, I was kind of tucked up, if you know what I mean, and there wasn't anything too delicate exposed, but still, the idea of getting my bollocks crushed under the trainer of some disgusting little thug had my heart practically jumping out of my throat. It sort of reminded me of that scene from A Clockwork Orange. They were there to rob us. That was bloody obvious, but they clearly took a great deal of joy in just being able to terrorize someone for a bit, and they seemed to get a real kick out of realizing that I wasn't from Liverpool. At some point I said something like, "Just take what you want. Please don't hurt me." And they burst out laughing. I wouldn't say I'm posh by any stretch of the imagination, but I'd definitely say I'm well more spoken than your average Scouser. They started mimicking me in these little voices, stamping on my head and kicking me. I just lay there, wishing I'd never said anything. After what seemed like forever, listening to those kids ferrying out belongings into the alley behind the house, they finally left. But not before putting one of their knives to my throat and telling me that they'd be back to cut my head off if they so much as even saw a police officer in the area. Then as quickly as they'd all appeared, they just ghosted. I waited for a long time before I found it in me to stand up, and as I tried, my knees were way shakier than I'd care to admit. I went from room to room surveying the destruction. The place was a mess, but the thing that amazed and gutted me more than anything else was the sheer amount of stuff they'd taken. God knows how they'd got it all away from the house, but they'd taken the TVs, our game consoles, audio equipment, pretty much anything electrical that wasn't nailed down. It also looked like they'd taken pretty much all our trainers and had raided our closets for any clothes that took their liking. I wanted to call the police, really did, but with what phone? I'm almost glad I got a few kicks to the head, otherwise the sense of shame and humiliation might have been too much to bear. I ended up knocking at my neighbors' houses, but unlike me, they were way too smart to answer their doors to strangers on Halloween. It was probably the single worst experience of my life up to that point. I had to just go back inside the house and sit there in the living room couch with my head in my hands, just trying not to hold back tears. It was hours before any of my drunken housemates arrived back. Before that, I think I just sort of sat there at the kitchen table, in the one room that hadn't been completely ransacked, just drinking a few tins of lager, feeling absolutely shell-shocked, until finally 2 of them who hadn't polled returned home. And that's about the end of it. There's no real resolution to the story. The police couldn't do anything other than take down a list of what had been stolen in the hopes that any of the laptops turned up in pawn shops, but we never heard back about anything involving that. It was weird in that house for a long while after. I used to think the other lads blamed me for what happened, for not defending the house property, but I realized that was just the trauma from that night making me doubt myself. I had nightmares for a while, a long while actually, and in the end my parents paid for a few counseling sessions to help me get through my skull that what happened that night really wasn't my fault, how it could have happened to anyone. I got past it in time, but to this day, it remains the single most terrifying event of my entire life.